Alright, since I'm on the subject, let's just do it, man. Let's get deep. Let's cover Mike Tyson's entire career from start to finish, and I can give you some facts, figures, and anecdotes along the way. So, let's start out with his amateur career. Now, there's varying different accounts of how many amateur fights Mike Tyson actually had. I've heard some people say it was 20 odd, other people 30 odd, and other people 40 odd fights. There is no definitive account of how many amateur fights Mike Tyson actually had. I'm sure there are going to be people in the comment section to this video claiming they have the definitive amateur record for Mike Tyson. No, you don't. I have heard countless accounts of how many fights Mike Tyson actually had as an amateur. Nobody knows for sure. And including varying different accounts from his own team. Right? His own team are giving different accounts. Jacobs. All these people are giving different accounts as to how many amateur fights he actually had. Anyway, what we do know is there is a record of his amateur highlights here on BoxRec. Now, some of his amateur fights, quite a few of them I've actually seen. Others I haven't seen. I guess, not all of them were filmed. But some of the highlights here were the fact that he won the Junior Olympics twice. Now, when Mike Tyson was a junior, okay, in amateur boxing, if you're under 16, this is how it is now anyway, or is it under 17? I can't remember if it was different now. But anyway, when you're under a certain age in the amateurs, they class you as a junior. And then once you get over that age, they class you as a senior. When Mike Tyson was a junior, he was very, very physically developed for his age. He looked like a man. His body was like a man. And so most of the guys he was fighting were not like men. They were his weight class, but they tended to be tall and very skinny. There was no musculature to them at all. And he was able to just overpower guys like that because they were just children, basically, just tall children. Whereas Mike Tyson was literally a child in a man's body. So he was walking through people when he was a junior. It's not until he stepped up to senior level, when he was fighting older guys who were just as, physically developed as him or more, that's when he started having a few issues in the amateurs. He was stopped by a guy called Al Evans. Now, Tyson was, I think, only about 15 or 6. I think he was 16 when he fought Al Evans. And Al Evans stopped him in the third round. He was the only guy, as far as I'm aware, to stop Mike Tyson in the amateurs was Al Evans. So he was stopped in that fight, but again, he was fighting, a man, a guy who was 27 when Tyson was 16. He went on to win the he didn't win the Golden Gloves. He got to the final with the Golden Gloves and lost to Craig Payne. I've actually seen that Craig Payne fight. It's not a particularly great fight. Tyson is kind of swarming all over Craig Payne and mauling him, but neither one of them are landing that many clean blows. Payne is tough, though, in that fight, I can tell you that. But it wasn't one of Tyson's most impressive amateur contests. But again, Craig Payne is a lot older than Tyson. And, some of these older guys are able to absorb Tyson's attacks. Haven't seen the Oldham fight, I don't think. That was a disqualification. Oh, actually, I think I've heard about that fight. That's an African guy, I think, who refused to fight in the ring against Tyson. And then Tyson did something to get himself disqualified. Yeah, I remember that. I remember hearing about it. I've never seen it, but I remember hearing about it. But this was an African guy who apparently refused to fight because he was intimidated by Tyson. Anyway, he went on to, won the Golden Gloves here. Now, this is two of the biggest highlights of Tyson's career. He lost to Henry Tillman in the Olympic trials, and he also lost to Henry Tillman in the box office in the same year. Both of these fights are on YouTube. Any of you can go watch them. It says here controversial both times. I don't personally see either fight as a controversial win for Henry Tillman. And Howard Cosell, who does the commentary for the Tillman rematch in the amateurs, he mentions the fact that he alludes to the fact that some people were questioning the decision in the first Tyson-Tillman fight. And he points out that in amateur boxing, aggressiveness is not scored. You don't get any extra points for being aggressive. Whereas in professional boxing, you do. So basically what he was saying is, if the Tillman fights had been scored based upon professional boxing criteria, then the result might have been different. But based upon amateur boxing criteria, a guy like Henry Tillman can run around the ring and flick out some weak punches and get a decision. And that's exactly what happened both times. Tillman was actually dropped in the first fight. In the second fight, he wasn't dropped, but, he just moved around the ring, flicked a jab and a few shots out, tied Tyson up when he could. And Tyson wasn't really able to do much about it. He wasn't able to close Tillman down effectively or really do much. And Tillman got a decision both times. Tillman ended up going to the Olympics and medaling at the Olympics. I think he won a gold medal at heavyweight in the 84 Olympics in LA. So, yeah, those were Tyson's amateur highlights. Also, it has to be, one thing we have to talk about when Tyson was an amateur was his infamous sparring session with Lennox Lewis, where on the first day, the first time they sparred, Mike Tyson knocked Lennox Lewis out. Now, this is true. He did fly across the ring the first time they sparred, and he knocked Lennox Lewis out. He actually knocked Lewis out the ring. The next day they sparred, and he didn't knock Lewis out, and Lewis stayed for a couple more days while they were sparring, and Lewis claims he actually did okay, and Mike Tyson said Lewis came back the next day after, knocking Lewis out the ring. Lewis came back the next day and tried to kill him. This was Mike Tyson's own words. Now, as with so many other people that Mike Tyson stepped in the ring with when he was an amateur, he was this is Tyson at like 13 years old. Look at the size of him. How many 13-year-olds have you seen like that? Right? So, Henry Tillman was a big guy. This is when Tyson was fighting as a senior. So he was fighting guys who were physically strong enough to absorb what he was dishing out. But yeah, when he sparred Lennox Lewis when they were both amateurs, Lewis was a beanpole. Lewis was not the Lennox Lewis that he went on to become in the professionals, where he was a big, strong, powerful heavyweight. No, Mike Tyson was a big, strong, powerful child in a man's body when he sparred Lewis, but Lewis was a child, all right? That is a picture there of Lennox Lewis with Mike Tyson. Look at Mike Tyson, right? Like Mr. Universe, Lennox Lewis was a string bean. No chest, no arms, nothing, a string bean. This is the Lennox Lewis who Mike Tyson knocked out, all right? He wasn't even the Lennox Lewis that went on to win the 88 Olympics in Seoul in terms of his body. Mike Tyson was just somebody who developed physically far earlier than most other people his age. But he stopped growing at quite a young age as well. He must have stopped growing at like 16 or, around that kind of age when he was a teenager. He stopped growing quite early. So, yeah, I'm just putting things in context as to exactly what happened in the sparring session there. Now, there was also another infamous sparring session in Mike Tyson's career, which happened between him and Evander Holyfield. And it was actually during the Olympic trials or the box-offs. I can't remember which. But it was in 84. He sparred Holyfield. Now, Holyfield in the amateurs was a light heavyweight. He was 175 pounds around there or thereabouts. I'm not sure if light heavyweight in the amateurs back then was 175, but it was roughly that. So you've got 175 pound Holyfield sparring a 200 plus pounds Mike Tyson. And all accounts of people who were there said that Holyfield held his own, or more than held his own, against Mike Tyson. But they only sparred for one round. That has to be said. They sparred for one round, and the sparring session was so fierce that the members of each guy's team jumped in and stopped the sparring session because it was too fierce, because both guys had fights, right? They had fights in the Olympic trials or the Olympic box-offs. So they weren't trying to allow them to damage each other. They were telling them, no, save it for your fights in the actual ring. Don't damage each other in the sparring session. But it was kind of a precursor, and it was an omen as to what was to come in Mike Tyson's career years down the line. Because if a 175 pound Evander Holyfield is holding his own with you when you've got a 25 pound weight advantage, that means Holyfield knows something about your style. Maybe he has your number stylistically. Technically, he can hang with you, even when he's giving away 25 pounds in weight. So, and Holyfield was known in the amateurs for taking on a lot of these tough guys who people feared and beating them. There was a guy in the amateurs called Ricky Womack, right, who, his life ended in tragedy. You can go look that up. But in the amateurs, he was feared. And he was Manny Stewart described him as a Mike Tyson bully type character. And he said, Manny Stewart also said about Holyfield that Holyfield was obsessed with fighting bullies, guys who everybody said he couldn't beat, guys who everybody was afraid of. Those are the kind of guys that Holyfield wanted to go and fight. Yeah. And as I say, somehow he found himself in the ring sparring Tyson when he was 25 pounds lighter. I mean, Holyfield probably fancied testing himself against this big bad bully who everybody was scared of. But anyway, he lost the 2 fights to Tillman in the Olympic trials and box off, so he never managed to go to the Olympics. He had a couple amateur fights after that. Then he turns professional. Now, Mike Tyson is often credited for being the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, and it was a great achievement. But the record that he broke, becoming the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, was set by Floyd Patterson. Floyd Patterson was also trained by Cus D'Amato. Now, one of the reasons that Mike Tyson was able to become the youngest heavyweight champion of all time wasn't just because he was very good, because he was very good. He was a precocious talent. But another reason he was able to become the youngest heavyweight champion of all time is because he fought Trevor Berbick, who was one of the weakest heavyweight champions in history. And yet another reason why Mike Tyson was able to become the youngest heavyweight champion of all time was because of the fact that he was trained and managed by the same people in the amateurs that he was in the pro game. You see, and here's why that's significant. Because most amateurs have got to win something significant in the amateur system in order to secure a big professional contract. You see? And this is why most amateurs don't turn professional as young as Tyson did. Tyson turned pro when he was 18. And he was fast-tracked to the heavyweight title. He had something like, 27, 28, 30 fights or something like that by the time he fought for the title in the space of 2 years. So he was fast-tracked, but he had a hell of a lot of fights in the space of 2 years. I mean, an insane number of fights. Sometimes he was fighting twice a month. Right? So an insane number of fights in his first 2 years. And again, this was down to the fact that he was managed and promoted by the same people who had him since the amateurs. So when he turned pro, Tyson didn't have to shop around to try and get a professional contract. You see, he had the luxury of turning pro knowing that he had already had a team behind him, an experienced team with, Cus D'Amato initially at the helm, who had guided people to the heavyweight championship before. Cus D'Amato had guided Floyd Patterson to the heavyweight title before. He guided Jose Torres to the light heavyweight title before. All right. So Cus D'Amato was a connected man. So was Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton. These were connected men. Yeah. So Tyson was in a very unique and privileged position, turning professional, a position which other amateurs were not in. Many of them. Yeah. This is why many amateurs choose to stay amateur for so long, because they want to win something major so that they can attract one of the major promoters to sign them. You see, so this is another one of the reasons why Mike Tyson was one of the youngest was the youngest heavyweight champion of all time. I mean, Trevor Berbick. Do you think that Lennox Lewis or Riddick Bowe or Muhammad Ali couldn't have beaten Trevor Berbick when they were 20? I'm telling you, they could have done. I'm telling you now, they could have beaten Trevor Berbick. But as I say, Mike Tyson's team did an excellent job with him, maneuvering him very quickly. Taking him all the way from the amateur days, grooming him into a professional. Anyway, now, let's have a look at Mike Tyson's professional record. Now, one of the interesting things about Tyson is that during his pro career, they added 1.5 inches of height onto him. I don't know why, but they added 1.5 inches of height. And one of the things as well with Mike Tyson, which I always found strange, is that, let's have a look here. Mike Tyson used to wear shoes that actually made him taller. Yeah, let's see. in the ring, he wore boxing boots that had a very thick sole on them, an unusually thick sole. You see, most boxing boots have got a very thin sole. I'm trying to find a picture here of Tyson where you can see his boots. Here you can see. And I encourage all you guys to go and have a look. There you can see. You know, he wears he wears boots that have got probably like an inch of sole on them, which is very unusual for boxing boots, which have normally got a very, very thin sole. But Tyson used to wear boots with a thicker sole, maybe to give himself a bit of extra height. I don't know. But anyway, he was listed as 5'11 and a half throughout pretty much the entirety of his professional career. But after his professional career, when they measured him properly, he turned out to only be 5'10, which actually makes his achievements even more remarkable. Yeah, because 5'11 and a half, that's just a shade under 6 feet. Really, he was only 5'10, which was the same height as Rocky Marciano. So to have achieved what he did against guys who were 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", that's impressive for a guy that short with a 71-inch reach to be able to achieve what he did. Anyway, let's start out with his first fight. Hector Mercedes, he was running through these journeymen. These guys are just journeymen. People like Hector Mercedes, Trent Singleton. There's only one of Mike Tyson's early fights which wasn't actually recorded and there's no footage of. I can't remember off the top of my head which fight it was. I've seen Mercedes, Singleton, Don Halpin, Ricardo Spain. I mean, this guy was a very small guy, 184 pounds when Tyson was 217. Alderson looked like some big country bumpkin. Who else was there? Larry Sims. I'm not sure. The Larry Sims fight might be the one that there's no footage of. Lorenzo Candy, I've seen. Michael Johnson, some guy with a big, crazy looking afro. Mike Tyson knocked his teeth out in this fight. Michael Johnson. He knocked out a couple of his teeth. Who else was there? Donnie Long. Donnie Long also had a crazy afro, come to think of it. Another guy with a mad afro. He looked like Afro Thunder from that PlayStation game from back in the days. And Tyson dropped him with a big left hook, I remember that. And then he dropped him with like a triple or double left hook again after he got up. Robert Cole, I think he got dropped with a left hook. Sterling Benjamin. I think he was from Trinidad, Sterling Benjamin. And I remember Sterling Benjamin after the fight saying that was the hardest he'd ever been hit when he fought Tyson. Eddie Richardson was a big, tall beanpole of a man. 212 pounds. He was about 6'6". Tyson hit him with a right hand. He went flying. Conroy Nelson was a guy with a pretty impressive physique who Tyson got rid of in a couple of rounds. Sammy Scaff was like a big... Tyson described him as a redneck. Sammy Scaff, a big, strong redneck. He was about 6'5", real big, strong, slow, lumbering guy who Tyson took out in a round, bust his nose. His nose was an absolute mess. Mark Young, a small heavyweight, really just a cruiserweight who Tyson hit with one punch. I remember it was the right hook that he hit Mark Young with, and it almost looked like it didn't land. It was like a phantom punch, like when Ali fought Sonny Liston. Ali hit Liston with like a phantom punch, they called it. Well, that was Mike Tyson's phantom punch against Mark Young. If you look at it in slow-mo, it does look like it lands, but it kind of like just skims Mark Young's face. But it was enough to drop him and put him down for the count. David Jaco, skinny beanpole of a man. He was around 6'5", 210. Tyson walked through him in a round. He kept getting up. He was a tough guy. Mike Jameson. This guy, Mike Jameson, ended up being one of Mike Tyson's main sparring partners for years afterwards. Mike Jameson, a journeyman, but a very tough guy. He hung in there for 5 rounds against Tyson. Tyson ended up putting him on the floor with a tremendous combination. It was like in a split second, he landed about 5 or 6 shots on Jameson. I think that might have been in the 4th round, not in the 5th. And then he finished him off in the 5th. Jameson took a hell of a beating. He was a human heavy bag in that fight. So yeah, Mike Jameson, kind of a lumbering journeyman who was around 6'4", I think Mike Jameson, 236. He was kind of a flabby 6'4" journeyman. But he absorbed a lot of punishment from Mike Tyson and became one of his primary sparring partners. So did Jesse Ferguson. All right, Jesse Ferguson at the time was a contender in his own right. He hung in there against Tyson for a few rounds, but was ultimately disqualified for excessive holding. Now, this originally went down as a DQ win for Tyson. Yeah. But I mean, it says here they changed the result to a TKO. And the reason why they changed the result is for marketing purposes. It's because Tyson's team put pressure on the New York State Athletic Commission to change the result to a KO because they wanted to market Tyson as having this incredible KO streak. They were hoping to break Rocky Marciano's KO streak. You see, that's why they put pressure on them to change it to a TKO rather than a disqualification win for Tyson, because that would have broken his KO streak. Then he fought Steve Zalski. Steve Zalski was a tough man. Apparently he was a fairly decent amateur, Steve Zalski, but he was a tough dude. Again, he's a journeyman, but I mean, Ferguson wasn't a journeyman, but everybody else Tyson had fought was a journeyman. Or a journeyman to be, you know, the likes of Alderson, who was undefeated in Spain, and all these guys. But anyway, so the Ferguson fight was his first step up, and he dealt with Ferguson in good fashion, took him out, the famous uppercut, his signature combination, the right hook to the body followed by the uppercut, and he broke Ferguson's nose. And after this fight, in the locker room, when he was talking to the journalists, he famously said that he was trying to drive, where are we at? He was trying to drive Ferguson's nose bone up into his brain. Yeah, that was Tyson's viciousness. And it was a tremendous punch that he hit Ferguson with. His nose was bleeding profusely. Ferguson got up and he just held for the rest of the fight until he was disqualified. Anyway, Steve Zalski, tough guy. Tyson got rid of him. Then came the next step up against James Tillis. And I spoke about this fight in the recent Mike Tyson video I did. So don't need to go into it too much. But Tillis was a journeyman. He'd been around the block. He'd fought for the world title once, but his best days were behind him. He was coming off 3 back-to-back losses when he going into the Tyson fight, but he did manage to give Tyson a decent scrap, and it was a relatively competitive fight, but Tyson did win. He did drop Tillis in the 4th. Tillis wasn't seriously hurt when he got dropped. It was more of a balance shot. Tyson surprised him with a left hook and Tillis went down. A good shot, legitimate knockdown, but Tillis wasn't particularly hurt from the shot. He got up very quickly, carried on, and Tyson never really came close to dropping him again. So that was a good learning fight for Mike Tyson, you know, being in there with somebody as experienced as James Tillis. Tyson had, what was this, his 19th fight at the time when he fought James Tillis, something like that. And just to compare Mike Tyson's career to somebody like an Anthony Joshua, in Mike Tyson's 19th fight, I think that must have been his 18th or 19th fight, he fought Tillis. In Anthony Joshua's 19th fight, he was fighting Klitschko, right? Or was it his 20th fight? But by this stage in Anthony Joshua's career, he was already a world champion and he was already fighting elite guys like, you know, Klitschko and so on and so forth. I'm just giving you a comparison. I'm not saying Joshua beats Mike Tyson necessarily. I'm just telling you where they were at in their respective careers after this number of fights. So James Tillis, and you know, I remember there was a story about James Tillis saying that he changed his diet for the Mike Tyson fight, you know, and that was going to make all the difference, and he was going to perform better against Tyson because he changed his diet and he cut out wheat, okay, and he had a wheat allergy. Okay, that's all well and good. You know, the Tyson fanboys will say, well, that's the reason Tillis performed so well against Tyson. But after the Tyson fight, all right, Tillis must have known, he must have continued the same diet. After the Tyson fight, I think it was the same year or the year after, Tillis lost to Jerry Coetzee. Was it Jerry or Pierre? Because there was 2 South African heavyweights. Let me just check here. Where are we at? Tyson. No, it wasn't Coetzee. Sorry. Bogner. He already lost to Coetzee prior. It was the Bogner fight that he lost after Tyson. And it was in the same year. All right. So he loses to Tyson. And then all of a sudden, what? We're supposed to believe that James Tillis is some amazing contender because he's changed his diet now. And now he's going to, you know, be one of the best heavyweights in the world. And he goes and loses to Joe Bogner. Right? You know how old Joe Bogner was by the time he fought James Tillis? You know, then he has draws with Avery Rules. He loses to Mike Williams. Come on now. Come on. James Tillis was a journeyman. Let's stop the insanity, please, Mike Tyson fanboys. So he fought James Tillis, tough fight. Then he went on to fight Mitch Greene. Now, Mitch Greene, this was an interesting fight because this wasn't only, you know, another step up for Mike Tyson in a certain sense. Although, you know, Tillis was probably better than Greene, to be fair, but it was a step up from the Zalskis of the world, etc. But the Mitch Greene fight was interesting because Mitch Greene was a well-known gang leader on the streets of New York. Yeah, this is facts now. And in fact, there's a very famous movie called Warriors, and Warriors was partly based on Mitch Greene and his life. Yeah, you go look that up. So Mitch Blood Greene, was a well-known gang leader in New York. And Mitch Greene's gang was actually a rival to Mike Tyson's gang. Mike Tyson was part of a gang called the Jolly Stompers. Crazy name for a gang. So Tyson and Greene were from rival gangs. And this fight between the two of them was basically a fight between the two toughest guys in terms of fighting from those rival gangs. I'm sure there were more vicious and ruthless people in the Jolly Stompers than Mike Tyson in terms of people who were murderers and all kinds of stuff. But in terms of the ability in fist fighting, this was a fight between Mitch Greene's gang and Mike Tyson's gang. That's what it was. That's what people in New York at the time knew about this fight, that it was a clash of two gangs, two New York street gangs. So he beat Mitch Greene. Mitch Greene, a very tough guy, by the way. Mitch Greene went on to be a journeyman, fringe contender at the time, went on to be a journeyman, but Mitch Greene was a very, very tough man, and he had a tremendous chin, even though he wasn't, he was 6'5", Mitch Greene as well, so he was a tall guy, 225, not bad, I guess, for 6'5", but a fairly slim guy, not the most skilled dude, but a very, very tough man, and completely crazy, by the way. Mitch Greene was nuts. Mitch Greene, one of the craziest heavyweights you'll ever see, and Mike Tyson in the street actually tried to avoid Mitch Greene. Most of the time. There was a famous incident outside Dapper Dan's, which was in, I think, Harlem. Was it Harlem? Is it Brooklyn or Harlem that Dapper Dan's is in? It was a famous store where, famous clothing store in New York. And Mitch Greene, this was years afterwards, after they had their fight in the ring. Mitch Greene went into the store to try and approach Mike Tyson, and he grabbed Mike Tyson, looking for a rematch, and Tyson punched him. And there are very indifferent accounts, but Mitch Greene says Tyson hit him, and then Greene said he tried to come back at Tyson, and Tyson jumped in his car and drove away. But then there are other people who were mostly Tyson fans that were there who said that Tyson just beat the crap out of Greene and laid him out. I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I tend to suspect that the truth is somewhere in the middle, that Tyson did attack Mitch Greene and he broke his hand against Greene. So once he realized his hand was broken, he was like, you know what? This guy's crazy. He's probably high on PCP or something. I need to get out of here. Or maybe his bodyguards and everything said, you know what, Mike, we better go. And they got him in a limo and they drove off, because Mitch Greene's crazy. Because that wasn't the last time that Mitch Greene would come after Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson even spoke about Mitch Greene approaching him somewhere in Manhattan when Mike Tyson was at a restaurant. And this is after these two incidents. And I think he said Mitch Greene was on a bicycle or something. Like Debo from the movie Friday. Mitch Greene come up on a bicycle, sees Tyson, and he makes a beeline for... He said whenever he would see Mitch Greene in the street, Mitch Greene would try and approach him, because Mitch Greene was absolutely nuts. He had no fear of Tyson at all. Even after Tyson beat him up in their fight and also in the street fight, Mitch Greene still had no fear of Tyson because he was completely insane. God knows what kind of angel dust or crack he was doing, but he was a madman. Anyway, after that, he fought Reggie Gross. He knocked out Reggie Gross in the first round. The Reggie Gross fight is one of the highlights that they put in Mike Tyson's highlight reel, because he drops Reggie Gross with a left hook, but prior to dropping him with a left hook, he manages to move his head and avoid a massive combination from Reggie Gross. Reggie Gross must throw about 20 shots or something, and Mike Tyson slips and slides and avoids all these shots and then comes out with his big left hook to drop Reggie Gross. Now, Reggie Gross was actually a career criminal, a hardened criminal. I think he'd been in prison for armed robbery prior to fighting Tyson, and he went on to go back into prison for murder. So Reggie Gross was a serious dude on the streets. William Jose, I'm not sure if I probably have seen that fight, if it's been televised. If it's not the one that wasn't televised or wasn't filmed, then I'm sure I've seen the William Jose fight. But it was definitely at least one of Tyson's early fights that never got filmed. Lorenzo Boyd. Now, Lorenzo Boyd, I remember this fight. Tyson knocked him out with the right to the body and then an uppercut, which was delivered with extreme speed. Boyd was actually a policeman, and Mike Tyson said that he really wanted to hurt Boyd even more because of the fact that he heard the guy was a policeman. Now, Tyson in this fight, I believe, was it this fight? I think it was this fight where Mike Tyson almost exclusively used his right hand because he'd hurt his left hand in some kind of, I'm not sure if he'd hurt his left hand in sparring or it was an accident with his pigeons or something like that. But yeah, he'd hurt his left hand somehow. And so he used his right hand a hell of a lot more in this fight than he normally would. And, you know, speaking about pigeons, there's obviously the famous story of Mike Tyson when he was a child, when he first discovered he had the ability to fight, is when a bully caught him on the rooftop where he used to keep his pigeons, because Tyson was, you know, somebody who used to keep pigeons as a hobby, as many people in Brooklyn did at the time and in New York. So a bully caught him on the rooftop and decapitated one of his pigeons, and Tyson flew into a rage and he attacked this bully with wild overhand rights, and the bully was an older guy who was bigger than him, and that stopped people from bullying Mike Tyson, you know, after that incident, because Tyson was a guy who was kind of a bit chubby as a kid with a squeaky voice, and he wore glasses, and he used to get bullied and picked on all the time. But that incident on the rooftop where he, you know, managed to beat up that bully earned him a little bit of a reputation. But Tyson says that his reputation as a street fighter before, you know, meeting Bobby Stewart and then eventually Customado, he said his reputation as a street fighter was grossly exaggerated. He said he lost plenty of street fights when he was growing up as a kid. Even after the incident with his pigeon, he lost plenty of street fights, you know. So that whole myth that Mike Tyson was just an invincible street fighter from day one is not true. Tyson himself said it's not true. But anyway, he went on to fight Marvis Frazier. Now, Marvis Frazier was a fringe contender. He'd been knocked out in one round by Larry Holmes. And yeah, going into the Tyson fight, very few people gave Marvis Frazier much of a chance. Tyson just walked straight up to Marvis Frazier, unloaded a combination, and Frazier was out cold. You know, he was out cold on his knees in the corner. And just a devastating performance by Mike Tyson. Walked straight through the guy. Then he fought Jose Roberto. Now, Jose Roberto was a Cuban who grew up in the US. So I think he was born in Cuba, but he definitely had an American accent. I think he was based out of Miami. And Jose Roberto was a tough guy, you know, kind of fringe contender, but he was a tough guy. And he absorbed a hell of a lot of punishment from Mike Tyson over the course of 10 rounds. Down 3 times, managed to survive to the 10th, but the referee ultimately waved it off. The referee, Rudy Battle, waved it off in the 10th. But, you know, Roberto did well to last as long as he did and absorb the amount of punishment he did. He was a tall, thin guy, 6'5", 211. So we're talking about, you know, kind of Deontay Wilder type physique here, Jose Roberto, and he lasted until, as I say, the 10th round. Tyson himself is one of his lightest weights here for several fights. He weighed 213 against Jose Roberto, which was interesting. Then he fought Ratliff. Now, Ratliff was really a cruiserweight. I mean, you can see 201 pounds. He was coming up from cruiserweight. Mike Tyson hit him with a left hook, almost left jab. It was like a hook come jab that he hit him with in the second round, which dropped him. And yeah, he did away with him in that fight. Then was his title challenge against Trevor Berbick. Now, how many fights exactly did Mike Tyson have when he challenged Trevor Berbick? Let's have a look. Where are we at with Mike Tyson? Yeah, okay, Mike Tyson was 27-0 by the time he fought Trevor Berbick. Now, again, let's look at Tyson when he turned professional. In 85, okay, sometimes I'm getting the dates mixed up here because they're not in the same order as they are in the UK. You know, in the UK, we put the day first, then the month, then the year. You see, whereas in the US, they put we put, the day first, then the month, then the year. Okay, it is that way. Why am I getting confused then? Because it is day, month, and year. Okay, so it is the UK way here. But maybe because it's backwards, I'm getting a little confused. But anyway, Tyson turned pro on the 6th of March, 85. So he had 27 fights between March 85 and where are we at? November 86. So that's less than 2 years. In less than 2 years, the guy had 27 fights. That is incredible that his team managed to get him out 27 times in less than 2 years. That is remarkable. And again, that's one of the reasons why he became the youngest heavyweight champion of all time, because his team were able to get him out so frequently and box him so often. I mean, it's incredible. He had 27 fights in less than 2 years. Anyway, he took on Trevor Berbick. Berbick was a tough guy, a weak champion. Let's not get it twisted. He was a weak champion, but he was a tough guy from Jamaica, had a lot of heart. He had been knocked out in 1 or 2 rounds earlier on in his career, Trevor Berbick. Now, Trevor Berbick was infamous for ending the career of Muhammad Ali. He was the last guy that Muhammad Ali stepped in the ring with. Obviously, Ali was way, way over the hill and totally washed up. He beat Ali, I think it was in Bahamas. Nassau, Bahamas, when he beat Ali. And that was Ali's last fight. I think it was Ali. I'm sure it was Ali's last fight. But anyway, Trevor Berbick was knocked out earlier on in his career in 1 round by Bernardo Mercado. Now, I haven't actually seen any footage of this fight. Maybe there is some now on YouTube. I haven't checked for, a couple years, but I haven't seen any footage. But yeah, Berbick was knocked out clean, and it isn't a TKO, it's a KO in 1 round. But he did go on to become a tough guy. He hung tough with Larry Holmes. He didn't come close to beating Holmes, but he hung tough in there. Then after the fight, after the Larry Holmes fight, that's when he fought Muhammad Ali and ended Ali's career. Yeah, it was. No, sorry, it wasn't in... it was in Bahamas. Okay, it was in Nassau, Bahamas. Yeah, so he had a win over Greg Page, which was a good win. A few decent wins in there. But ultimately, he lost to Carl Williams, lost to James. But anyway, let me not get sidetracked by looking at Trevor Berbick's record. He was a weak champion, but he was a tough guy. And he was a guy with a lot of heart. That's one thing that can be said. Now, in Tyson's prime, a lot of his opponents were scared of him. And therefore, they didn't do what needed to be done in order to exploit Tyson's weaknesses. But Trevor Berbick was a guy who had the heart to actually fight Tyson. But what he didn't have is he didn't have the defense and he didn't have the chin to go toe-to-toe with Tyson. So he tried to go toe-to-toe with Tyson, and Tyson took him out, accordingly. Because Berbick just did not have... And it's not like Berbick had a bad chin. He didn't have a bad chin. But he had been knocked out in 1 round before, so he was vulnerable to being caught early and stopped. It was his defense and his chin wasn't good enough to deal with Tyson, because Tyson had been in there with guys who had really good chins, guys like Mitch Greene, prior to fighting Trevor Berbick, guys who took all Mike Tyson's best shots and they didn't go anywhere. I mean, even James Tillis was able to absorb Mike Tyson's punching power better than Trevor Berbick did. So Berbick didn't have the chin or the defense to fight the kind of tactics he fought against Tyson. And as I say, he got taken out. He didn't have the boxing skills either, to be fair, to really fight any other way. So he did his best, but Tyson knocked him out, and Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, beating his stablemate, Floyd Patterson's record to the title. Then he fought James Bone Crusher Smith. That was a hugfest. Smith should have been disqualified, but Tyson couldn't really do anything about Smith's holding. I mean, he tried to box in the middle of the fight, and put some distance between himself and Smith, but that didn't really work that effectively. Tyson won by a landslide, but yeah, Smith made it very, very ugly. And Smith, again, was one of the weakest heavyweight champions in history. I mean, if we're talking about weak heavyweight champions today, trust me, there's nobody weaker than the likes of Trevor Berbick and James Bullcrusher Smith in today's heavyweight landscape. These were weak heavyweight champions. And I'm not disrespecting them as human beings, particularly Trevor Berbick, because he was a really tough guy, even though he had some funny run-ins with the law to do with rape and stuff like that. And he eventually was killed by his own nephew, Trevor Berbick, in Jamaica. He was hacked to death with a machete over a land dispute, Trevor Berbick, all right? That's just showing you how he went out. James Smith, as I say, hugfest, never went down against Tyson, was never hurt, never came close to going down or being hurt. In fact, the only person who was noticeably shaken in the fight was Mike Tyson in the 12th round when James Bone Crusher Smith caught him with a big right hand. Now, James Bone Crusher Smith, unlike Trevor Berbick, he clearly was intimidated by Mike Tyson. He was cut in the fight, there was a clash of heads, and that also kind of disheartened James Bone Crusher Smith, but he was definitely intimidated by Tyson. Tyson's speed and everything in front of him was just intimidating, and Tyson's knockout reputation really intimidated James Smith, and he really didn't fight. He just tried to survive the 12 rounds. Now, Pinklon Thomas, he did also show heart against Tyson. Pinklon Thomas was another guy with a very good chin. Yeah. So there were guys who were able to take Mike Tyson's power during his career, you know, before he was champion and while he was champion. Pinklon Thomas took a tremendous amount of punishment from Mike Tyson in the first couple of rounds, especially the first round. Tyson came out like a bat out of hell against Pinklon Thomas and hit him with everything except the kitchen sink, and Pinklon Thomas did not go down. But he took so much punishment in the first round that the referee called the doctor into the ring to have a look at Pinklon Thomas after the first round. And Pinklon Thomas at the time was trained by Angelo Dundee, and Dundee was going nuts in the corner at the doctor, telling him to get the hell away from Pinklon Thomas. But the doctor was so concerned about the amount of punishment Thomas had taken in the first round, he wanted to have a look at him. And as I mentioned in previous videos, Pinklon Thomas had well-documented problems with alcohol and heroin going into the Tyson fight. But yeah, Tyson took Pinklon Thomas out in the 6th round with one of the most impressive combinations you'll ever see from any weight class, but certainly the most impressive combinations you'll ever see from a heavyweight champion. And definitely one of his highlight reel combinations was the 15 or 20 punch combination he took out Pinklon Thomas with. A tremendous barrage of punches, very impressive to watch. Then Mike Tyson, and by the way, he's picking up titles here. He picked up the WBC title from Berbick, picked up the WBA version from Smith. Smith actually won his WBA title from Tim Witherspoon. He stopped Tim Witherspoon in the first round. He actually lost to Tim Witherspoon in their first fight. That was a rematch. He beat Witherspoon in the rematch in the first round. Tim Witherspoon, years later, after he'd retired, said that Don King basically paid him to take a dive in the James Smith rematch. You go look that up. That's what Tim Witherspoon said, that Don King basically insinuates Don King paid him to take a dive in the Smith rematch. Anyway, yeah, Pinklon Thomas, WBA title from James Smith, WBC from Trevor Berbick. Pinklon Thomas was a title defense. Then he took on Tony Tucker. Now, it has to be said though, there were a lot of people claiming that Pinklon Thomas was the second best heavyweight in the world at the time when Mike Tyson fought him, when Pinklon Thomas clearly wasn't, because, you see how other heavyweights did against Mike Tyson, and they did a lot better than Pinklon Thomas did. Pinklon Thomas was a good fighter, not really a puncher. He had a very good jab and a very good chin. That's what I can tell you about Pinklon Thomas. And he was a pretty good long range boxer. No defense though, absolutely no defense. I remember Pinklon Thomas when he fought Mike Weaver, and Mike Weaver was a tremendous puncher. He had no problem tagging Pinklon Thomas, and nor did many other fighters. Pinklon Thomas had no defense at all, but he was very tough. He had a good jab, and he was a decent boxer. But Tony Tucker, Mike Tyson's next opponent, was actually a better fighter than Pinklon Thomas. But anyway, so let's move on to Tony Tucker, who was the IBF champion at the time. This fight was initially scheduled for 15 rounds, but it was changed to 12 rounds at the last minute. As I say, Tucker was the IBF champion. Tucker was a good amateur. Was he in the Olympics? I always forget. I'm sure he was in the Olympics. He was in the Olympics, wasn't he? Let me just take a click on Tony Tucker. I'm sure he was in the Olympics. Did he win Olympic gold at heavyweight or something? Rather than super heavyweight? No, he didn't. He never went to the Olympics. No, I'm getting it twisted here. But he was still, he was at the Pan American Games, the World Cup. Okay, the Olympic trials. No, he was never an Olympic gold medalist. For some reason I felt like he was in the Olympics. Anyway, I'm misremembering here. But yeah, Tony Tucker was a good fighter, good amateur. He beat Buster Douglas, interestingly enough, to win his IBF version of the title. Now, originally, Michael Spinks held the IBF heavyweight title, and he won it from Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes had been champion forever, and he held the IBF title. Michael Spinks came along and he beat Larry Holmes in 2 very controversial fights. People to this day will swear blind that Larry Holmes won both fights, but Larry Holmes had upset the boxing establishment by saying that Rocky Marciano couldn't carry his jockstrap. All right. That upset a lot of people, and a lot of people believed that was the reason why Michael Spinks was given the 2 decisions over Larry Holmes, because Larry Holmes was close to beating Rocky Marciano's record. You see, and people believed there was a lot of politics involved, and certainly Larry Holmes believed there was politics involved. And the reason that he lost those Spinks fights on the cards was because of the fact that he disrespected Rocky Marciano, or there were certain people in the game who didn't want him to beat Rocky Marciano's record. Now, Larry Holmes was a Marmite kind of character, Larry Holmes. He was a very acid-tongued type of person. Holmes was a very blunt-speaking, character. You know, he was someone who just had no filter. Whatever was on his mind, he would speak it, and quite often it would offend people. But he wasn't like a Muhammad Ali who did it in kind of a funny and entertaining way. Larry Holmes was kind of like I don't know, just not as likable a character, you know, which is one of the reasons why the public never really took to Larry Holmes the way they took to Muhammad Ali. One, because he was Muhammad Ali's sparring partner, and he tried to kind of emulate Ali in terms of, you know, reciting poetry and, you know, copying Ali a little bit in terms of his persona, but he never pulled it off because he just didn't have Ali's charisma. So the public never really took to Larry Holmes in the first place, even though he was a great champion and he was involved in many great fights and showed a lot of heart and showed a lot of skill throughout his career. But when he is said to have disrespected Rocky Marciano, again, people believe that went against him. And anyway, that's the story behind Larry Holmes losing to Michael Spinks. Then Michael Spinks gave up his IBF title because he didn't want to take part in the HBO tournament. These fights were in the HBO tournament. Okay, Berbick, James Smith and Tony Tucker. These were in the HBO tournament. And the tournament was a heavyweight tournament, which was designed to unify all the heavyweight belts. Okay. Michael Spinks was supposed to be in it, but rather than partake in it, he vacated his IBF title. And that allowed Tony Tucker to fight James Buster Douglas for the vacant IBF title and then be in the HBO tournament. So, yeah, Tyson fought Tucker. It was supposed to be a 15-rounder, ended up being a 12-rounder. Tucker landed some good shots on Mike Tyson in the first couple of rounds. I think HBO had Tony Tucker ahead after the first 3 rounds. And from a technical point of view, Tucker was a good fighter. Okay, he was a big, tall, skinny guy, 221. He weighed the same as Tyson. He was 6'5", Tony Tucker. So, you know, kind of the same build as a Deontay Wilder, but just a couple of inches shorter at 6'5" rather than 6'7" that Wilder is. And one thing I can say about the likes of Tony Tucker was just as skilled, if not, no, Tony Tucker was more skilled than Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder. Yeah, in terms of pure skills, Tony Tucker was more skilled. He wasn't as good a fighter as Wilder or Joshua because he didn't have the punching power. He didn't have the physical presence. He didn't have the strength. He didn't have the tenacity. He didn't have the killer instinct. He didn't have the confidence of those guys. Okay, so there are other factors which make somebody good or great, etc., or effective. But in terms of just pure boxing skills, I'm telling you that Tony Tucker was better than Anthony Joshua or Deontay Wilder. Yeah, in terms of pure boxing skills. And he demonstrated in the Tyson fight how good his boxing skills were. Although after the second round, Tony Tucker claims that he broke his hand. I think it was his right hand. And so he wasn't very effective when it came to his counters after the second round. And really, Tyson was reduced to plodding and throwing one punch at a time after the first 2-3 rounds of the fight. You know, but Tyson said that this was the first. I remember Tyson was still with Kevin Rooney here. And Tyson said this was the first fight during his championship reign where he started to live the nightlife and party and stuff like that. So he says he wasn't in the greatest of shape against Tony Tucker, but he still managed to pull out a 12-round decision against Tucker. And they say that he out-jabbed Tucker. Well, apparently he did out-jab Tucker down the stretch, which is impressive against the guy who's 6'5", although Tony Tucker was not somebody who historically had a great jab. And Mike Tyson only managed to out-jab one of these guys. You know, if you go look at many of the other guys Mike Tyson fought in his title reign, he wasn't out-jabbing most of them. But Tony Tucker was one of the few guys he managed to out-jab the few tall guys. So, yeah, Tyson did his thing against Tony Tucker. Tucker was an experienced and skillful fighter. Again, a run-of-the-mill champion, you know, a weak champion when you look at it historically. But he had skills. He wasn't just, you know, a bum or anything like that. He had skills. And Mike Tyson was able to beat him on points. Never came close to dropping him. Never really hurt him. You know, never came close to stopping him. But he did win a UD over him. And Tony Tucker, by the way, also had drink and drug problems. The drink and drug problems for Tony Tucker were more serious after the Tyson fight, it has to be said. But, you know, it wasn't the first time that he knew about drink and drugs. You know, he knew about drink and drugs prior to the Tyson fight. Let's just put it that way. But after the Tyson fight is when the drink and drug problems really started hitting home with Tony Tucker. But still, that was a nice win for Mike Tyson. So he was, at this point, the undisputed heavyweight champion. Then he fought Tyrell Biggs. Now, Tyrell Biggs, he really did have serious drug problems prior to the Tyson fight. He had a crack cocaine problem. And as I mentioned in the previous video, he was signed to the Duvers. And the Duvers rushed him into a fight against Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was like 30-0 by this time, or 31-0. Tyrell Biggs was only 15-0, and he was coming off an unimpressive victory against David Bay, who was a big fat fringe contender. And he nearly lost the David Bay fight. He was badly cut in the fight, and he was looking very bad for him. And that was the fight before he fought Tyson. So the Duvers realized that Biggs was an accident waiting to happen because of his, crack cocaine problem. So they thought, you know what, we need to cash out on Biggs now. And they put him in with Mike Tyson when he was only 15-0. There was no way he was remotely ready for that fight. But as I say, they thought he was an accident waiting to happen. So they put him in with Mike Tyson, and he got dismantled. He got beaten up, and Tyson did a job on him, stopped him in 7. Biggs was fairly durable. He took a lot of Mike Tyson. You see, this is the thing about Mike Tyson's punching power as well. People act as though all Mike Tyson needs to do if he was to fight any of the champions today is just hit them once on the chin and the fight's over. Well, there were loads of guys who got hit loads of times on the chin by Mike Tyson, and the fight wasn't over immediately. There are people, as I say, Jose Roberto lasted many, many rounds with Mike Tyson, 10 rounds. Jesse Ferguson lasted a good amount of rounds. This guy's only 211 pounds. All right? I mean, you got guys like, where are we at now? Mike Jameson. He went like 5 rounds with Tyson. Mitch Greene went the distance. What, do all these guys back then have way better chins than the heavyweights today? I don't buy it. I do not buy it. Pinklon Thomas took loads of punches from Mike Tyson. Tony Tucker took his fair share of shots. Tony Tucker was fairly elusive, but he did get hit clean by Tyson a few times, and he took the shots no problem. So Mike Tyson's punching power was great, but it was exaggerated. Yeah, he was a very good puncher, but with Mike Tyson, what was more impressive than Mike Tyson's punching power was his speed. His speed was incredible. All right. Mike Tyson is one of the fastest heavyweights of all time in terms of, combination punching. The thing with Mike Tyson in terms of his speed, though, is he wasn't consistent with his speed throughout the course of a fight. He would start fights very fast and there'd be all these fast, ridiculous combinations, but then he'd slow right down. And in the intervening period between the early rounds and whenever the fight ended, Mike Tyson's punches were not particularly fast. He'd throw maybe the occasional burst of fast shots, but then there'd be times when he's throwing one punch at a time and the punches are not particularly quick. Whereas a guy like, let's say, a Muhammad Ali, his speed was much more consistent in his prime. He would throw fast shots all night long for 12 rounds or 15 rounds as it was back then in championship fights. 12 rounds for non-title fights, 15 rounds for title fights. Ali's speed was much more consistent in his prime than Mike Tyson. Tyson's speed was intermittent in his prime. He'd throw fast barrage of shots, then he'd slow right down, throw a few slow shots here and there, and then he'd gather his energy and come out with a big fast combination again. So that's one thing that has to be said about Mike Tyson's speed. But yeah, that was a story in the... I managed to beat Tony Tucker. That was a story in the Tyrell Biggs fight. Broke him down, took him out. Tyrell Biggs was an Olympic gold medalist. So was Audley Harrison. Yeah, I mean, and he was an Audley Harrison. He was the Audley Harrison of his day, was Tyrell Biggs. He was a guy who did great things in the amateurs. He actually beat Lennox Lewis in the 84 Olympics when Lewis was 18. Tyrell Biggs was older than that. And he beat Lennox Lewis. He was a very good amateur, Tyrell Biggs, but the drug problem just, messed him up. And I guess his style also, Tyrell Biggs, was far more suited to the amateurs than it ever was to the pros. That's another thing that has to be said. Far more suited to the amateurs. So anyway, got past Tyrell Biggs. That was scheduled for 15, never went close to 15, obviously. And now I think that was the last heavyweight title fight that was ever scheduled for 15 rounds. Then he fought Larry Holmes. Holmes was coming off a 2.5-year layoff, only had a month to train, 38 years old. He hung in there for a couple rounds, and then Mike Tyson took him out. I can't remember the train of thought I was on when I was talking about Mike Tyson's speed and punching power. Yeah, Mike Tyson's speed was more impressive than his punching power. Tyson was a very good puncher, but there are plenty of heavyweights out there over the years who have hit harder than Mike Tyson. Yeah, don't let nobody gas you up into thinking otherwise. Plenty of heavyweights hit harder than Tyson. Tyson was a good puncher, don't get it twisted. But it's not like Mike Tyson just has to hit you once and the fight's over. No. Tyson scored some one-punch knockouts, but there are plenty of guys who took loads of big punches from Mike Tyson for several rounds and it didn't go anywhere for a long time. All right? So again, remind yourself of that when you're thinking about how Tyson would do against, modern-day heavyweights. Or even heavyweights like Lewis in their prime or Klitschko in their prime. Remember the fact that Tyson fought plenty of guys hit them on the chin and nothing happened. Yeah, remember that. Anyway, fought Larry Holmes. Holmes was way past it. Took out Holmes in the 4th round. It was one of the highlight reel KOs of Mike Tyson's career. He dropped Holmes with a tremendous right hand that came out of nowhere, an overhand right that snuck through Holmes' guard. He went crashing to the canvas. He got up on drunken legs. He went down again from some glancing blows. Then he got up. He tried to survive the rest of the round, but Mike Tyson pursued him. Mike Tyson was throwing wild haymakers trying to get Larry Holmes out of there. He eventually trapped Holmes against the ropes, and Holmes tried to retaliate, but his right arm got caught up in the ropes. And as he tried to retaliate with an uppercut, but his arm was caught in the ropes, it left his head exposed, and Mike Tyson finished him off, I think, with 2 right hooks to the head and knocked Holmes out cold. So, yeah, that was Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes came back after that and he had kind of an Indian summer in his career, Larry Holmes. He beat the likes of Ray Mercer, but going into the Ray Mercer fight, Larry Holmes had about 7 or 8 consecutive wins, and he had a full training camp, unlike when he fought Tyson. I'm only speaking facts here. I'm not trying to hate on Tyson. I'm just trying to put things in context and give you the reality behind the situation with Larry Holmes, because this is something often said about Holmes, that people say, oh, he wasn't washed up when he fought Tyson because he went on to beat Ray Mercer. Yeah, but when he fought Ray Mercer, he had about 7 or 8 fights back to back in the space of a year, and he had a full training camp. So it's different when you have that kind of preparation than it is when you're coming off a 2.5-year layoff and you've only had about a month preparation. Very different. Anyway, fought Tony Tubbs. Tubbs actually did okay against Tyson in the 1st round, but Tubbs didn't have the punch resistance to be fighting Tyson the way that he was, especially early in the fight. The mistake that Tony Tubbs made was trying to fight Mike Tyson too early in the fight. If Tubbs had let it go a little bit later, he might have had more success. I mean, when I say a little bit later, I mean, if he'd let it go a little bit later before exchanging with Tyson on the inside, he might have had more success. But Tony Tubbs made the cardinal sin of exchanging with Mike Tyson too early in the fight, on the inside, and Mike Tyson caught him. I remember Tyson caught him with a left hook against the ropes, which wobbled him. And then Tyson hit him with was it a right? No, it was a left hook against the ropes, which wobbled him. Then there was an uppercut up close, which also wobbled him. And then Tyson hit him with a left hook, which split his eye. He had a massive gash in his eye, and Tubbs wobbled to the corner and laid down, and Tyson tried to hit him in the corner, but Tubbs was done. So that was a very impressive performance by Mike Tyson. At this point, we're talking about a prime Mike Tyson. The time when he was fighting Tony Tubbs. That fight was in Tokyo, in the Tokyo Dome in Japan. And that at the time, I think, might have been the biggest arena in the world. I can't remember now. But it was strange because the Japanese crowd were very, very quiet. It wasn't like an American crowd. Back then, American crowds actually used to get lively. Whereas today, they don't seem to get so lively. Barclays Center actually seems to be a bit of a more lively atmosphere. But a lot of American crowds for boxing these days are just not lively. But back then, in the 80s, they were lively. Especially for Mike Tyson fights, it was like crowds in the UK. They were very, very lively. So, yeah, the Tony Tubbs fight, good performance by Tyson. This is where we're talking about prime Tyson. And during these times, by the way, is when Mike Tyson was sparring Oliver McCall. Oliver McCall was never dropped by Tyson in sparring, never knocked out by Tyson in sparring. But there was a sparring session that I saw with Tyson and Oliver McCall, where Oliver McCall basically quit. He gets hit with a bunch of body shots from Tyson, and he claims Tyson's hitting him in the back. I mean, maybe one or two of the shots hit Tyson in the back, but they look like good shots to me. And McCall, I think, was showing some mental weakness. It was a precursor to what would happen to Oliver McCall when he fought Lennox Lewis in the rematch. He just crumbled mentally. Oliver McCall obviously had problems with crack cocaine addiction and drinking, well documented. And that's one of the reasons he lost the Lennox Lewis rematch, is because he was having serious psychological problems because of his crack cocaine addiction. But still, he was a crazy guy, Oliver McCall. He actually lost to Buster Douglas on the undercard of Mike Tyson. Actually, when was it? Yeah, I think it was on the undercard of Mike Tyson, Carter Truth Williams. I think. Was it? It was on one of Mike Tyson. Was it on Mike Tyson undercard? I can't remember now. Let's have a look at this card. I know that Buster Douglas fought some journeyman. Buster Douglas might have fought on this Tyson Spinks undercard. I'm sure he fought McCall on the Williams. Let's check here. I think he fought McCall on the Williams undercard. Yeah, he did. Yeah. So McCall fought Buster Douglas on the Tyson Williams undercard. We'll get to that in a minute. So anyway, where are we at now? Yeah, Tony Tubbs. So this is when he's sparring with Oliver McCall. McCall and Tyson kind of had like a gym rivalry where McCall says he sent Mike Tyson to the hospital a few times with a bloody nose and, on more than one occasion. He also used to brag about how he dropped Mike Tyson in sparring, but Tyson had never dropped him. And he did actually drop Mike Tyson in sparring because it was confirmed by Bill Caton. Years later, Bill Caton confirmed that, yeah, McCall did drop Mike Tyson in sparring with a right hand. He said Mike Tyson got up after being dropped by McCall and proceeded to give McCall a terrible beating for dropping him. But anyway, then came the Michael Spinks fight. Michael Spinks was the linear heavyweight champion. So all this time Mike Tyson's been fighting in world title fights, he still hasn't fought for the linear heavyweight title. Not that it really mattered because Tyson was better than Michael Spinks anyway. And he was recognized as the real champ, but there was a small contingent of people who were backing Spinks and they were saying, oh, he's the real champion. He's the linear champion. He's the man who beat the man. And Mike Tyson went in there and flattened Michael Spinks in, 91 seconds or something like that. Dropped him twice, first with a body shot, then a left uppercut. And then secondly with a left hook and then right uppercut, which landed on Michael Spinks' forehead and knocked him virtually out cold. And that is seen as the pinnacle of Mike Tyson's career. When people talk about prime Mike Tyson, they're talking about the Mike Tyson who beat Spinks and Tubbs. That's the pinnacle of Mike Tyson's career when he was 21 years old, nearly 22, 3 days short of his 22nd birthday when he beat Michael Spinks. And by the way, some people have talked about Mike Tyson and his relationship with Donald Trump. Well, for a lot of Mike Tyson's championship fights when he was a young champion, he was friends with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, I think, sponsored or co-promoted. I'm not sure if he co-promoted, but he at least sponsored a lot of Mike Tyson's fights. And if you look at the fights that he had in the convention hall on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, if you look at the banners that were hanging around these venues, you would see Trump Plaza as being, the banner that was hanging around the venues of some of these Mike Tyson fights. So him and, Donald Trump and Mike Tyson go way back. Donald Trump also knew Robin Givens, who was Mike Tyson's wife at the time. Well documented Mike Tyson was married to Robin Givens. Tyson beat Spinks. That was seen as his pinnacle. Then after the Spinks fight, Mike Tyson fired Kevin Rooney, fired Bill Caton. Actually, had he fired Caton by the time the Bruno fight happened? I think he had. All right. Now, by this time, Jimmy Jacobs was dead. All right. Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton were the two men who Cus D'Amato entrusted with managing and guiding Mike Tyson's career. Bill Caton, Jimmy Jacobs managing him, and Kevin Rooney training him. Bill Caton had died. Sorry, not Bill Caton. Jimmy Jacobs had died. So Bill Caton was left to manage Tyson and Rooney was still training him. But after the Spinks fight, he fired Kevin Rooney and he got rid of Bill Caton. Now, one of the reasons that he got rid of Kevin Rooney, it is said by people on the inside, is because Kevin Rooney was trying to get too involved in Mike Tyson's personal life. That he was saying personal things about Mike Tyson's relationship with Robin Givens, and he was warning Mike Tyson about Robin Givens and all this kind of stuff. And Mike Tyson didn't like it. And because he tried to get too involved in Mike Tyson's personal life, he fired Kevin Rooney. Now, some people say it was Don King who forced Mike Tyson to fire Kevin Rooney. I don't buy it. All right? Because nobody forced Mike Tyson to sign with Don King. And by the way, Mike Tyson wasn't as close with Bill Caton as he was with Jimmy Jacobs. Jimmy Jacobs, Mike Tyson had kind of a, big brother, little brother relationship with Jimmy Jacobs. So when Jimmy Jacobs died and left him with Bill Caton, Tyson wasn't really very close to Bill Caton. He kind of saw Bill Caton as just like a businessman, and I don't think he really trusted him. So I can understand him firing Caton. But firing Rooney too? I mean, I don't know about that, and again, he joined Don King off his own bat. He didn't have to join Don King. He could have joined somebody else, but he chose to join Don King because Don King came at Mike Tyson with the race card, basically. Don King told Mike Tyson, us black people have got to stick together. The white man has been robbing you for years. And Mike Tyson bought it. Mike Tyson was like, oh yeah, us black people do have to stick together. So you'll notice a change in Mike Tyson from the, after the Spinks fight. Mike Tyson started becoming very pro-black. Yeah, you look at Mike Tyson's image, the music he used to come to the ring to, The way he was talking outside the ring in between fights, he was, becoming very, very overtly pro-black. And this is partly because of some of the music that was around at the time, like Public Enemy, etc. But also because Don King was using that, black people have got to stick together card to gain Mike Tyson's trust. Obviously, Don King would go on to rob Mike Tyson. Don King don't give a damn about black people. The only color that Don King cares about is money green. All right. But he played that us black people got to stick together card to gain Mike Tyson's trust. Mike Tyson fell for it. And, the rest was history in terms of their relationship. So he then went on to fight Frank Bruno. Again, Bruno, another guy Bruno had a fairly decent chin. People say Bruno was chinny. He wasn't really chinny. The problem with Bruno was that when he got hit with a really good shot in a fight, he tended to freeze. But in terms of him just getting flattened all the time, anytime he got hit clean, no. The first time there was warning signs in Frank Bruno's career was when he fought a guy called Jumbo Cummins. And I remember, I think it was the British comedian Frank Skinner, who described Jumbo Cummins as having a name that sounded like an elephant-sized ejaculation. I always remember that. It's just a random thing I remember from decades ago. But anyway, Jumbo Cummins hit Frank Bruno with a big right hand, and Bruno was frozen in time. He was out on his feet, but that was at the end of a round. He managed to recover and he, went on to win that fight. But, and he obviously lost to Tim Witherspoon. He was stopped by Tim Witherspoon in the fight. He was actually winning, but he gassed out against Witherspoon. So Bruno had been stopped, but he also lost to Bone Crusher Smith. Bone Crusher Smith knocked him out in the final round, in the 10th round. But by that point, Bruno was tired and Smith hit him with a hell of a lot of shots before Bruno went down. And Smith was probably the only guy to properly flatten Frank Bruno. Yeah, Smith did properly flatten him. But nobody else really flattened Frank Bruno, So Bruno's chin was decent, but not amazing. And yeah, Mike Tyson beat the living crap out of Frank Bruno. He dropped Bruno within the first few seconds of the fight with a right hand, but Bruno, it was kind of a flash knockdown. Bruno wasn't seriously hurt. And the rest of the fight, Bruno managed to rock Tyson in the first round, but Tyson was kind of off balance at the same time. I don't think it was as bad as people make it out to be. Tyson was kind of off balance. And by the way, Mike Tyson's chin is one of the best chins ever in heavyweight boxing. I do think he has an underrated chin. And some people are going to say, how can it be one of the best chins in heavyweight boxing? Because he was knocked out by, a bunch of people. Yeah, but he got knocked out by a bunch of people who hit him hundreds and hundreds of times with clean power shots on the chin. And he was knackered. For most of his stoppage defeats. And obviously at the very end of his career, he was way over the hill and he just didn't have any fire in him. But the only time Mike Tyson was really knocked out properly, where he was out of it, I would say was in the Douglas fight. Not even in the Lennox Lewis fight, in the Douglas fight. But I'll get to that. Anyway, Frank Bruno beat the crap out of Bruno. In the 5th round, he unleashed a murderous barrage on Frank Bruno, which was just such a brutal barrage of punches. You really felt for Frank Bruno's safety. In that fight. And this was Tyson's first fight without Kevin Rooney in his corner. He had Jay Bright and Aaron Snow in his corner instead. And it turned out to be a tougher fight than a lot of people expected, the Frank Bruno fight. Frank Bruno was dropped in the first round, but he never went down for the rest of the fight. He finished the fight on his feet in the 5th round against the ropes, taking just countless Mike Tyson punches. And again, does Frank Bruno have a better chin than all the heavyweights today? Because he took dozens and dozens of flush punches on the chin from Mike Tyson, and other than the first round, he didn't go down. All right, so bear that in mind when you're thinking that Tyson just walks through everybody in the heavyweight division today, knocks them all out in one round. All he has to do is land one punch and he knocks everybody out clean. Really? Frank Bruno took dozens and dozens and dozens of clean punches on the chin from Mike Tyson just in the 5th and never went down. Bear that in mind. Then Mike Tyson fought Carl Williams. He did knock him out in the first round. Some people say it was a premature stoppage. Carl Williams went down from a big left hook. It was a very good move from Tyson. It was similar to the left hook that he hit James Tillis with, actually, where he ducked. Against Tillis, he ducked one of Tillis's punches and he came back with a big left hook. Whereas against Carl Williams, I think he ducked underneath Carl Williams' jab and then he came up with a big left hook that deposited Carl Williams on the canvas. Williams was on the ropes. The referee waved it off and Williams got to his feet. Some people say it was premature. It was what it was. Carl Williams never had a particularly good chin. He got stopped earlier on in his career by Mike Weaver in similar circumstances. So yeah, that was that. Then came the James Buster Douglas fight, which took place in Tokyo. People say Tyson was out partying and drinking sake and, being with Japanese girls. Well, there is an interview. Yeah, this interview right here, Mike Tyson talks about his, being in the hotel prior to his fight with Buster Douglas. And he said he was basically confined by his team to the hotel. So all this talk about Mike Tyson being out partying every night in, the lead up to the Buster Douglas fight, that's not what Mike Tyson says from his own lips. Mike Tyson from his own lips says he was confined to the hotel during the training camp for the Buster Douglas fight. Yeah, confined to the hotel, and they were just making sure he was going from the hotel to the gym, and he wasn't allowed to do anything else. So that's when he said he started having sex with the Japanese maids because they weren't letting him go out and party. Yeah, this is from Mike Tyson's own mouth. So all these Tyson fanboys claiming that Tyson was out every night partying and drinking in the Buster Douglas training camp. BS. Mike Tyson himself said he was confined to the hotel. Where was he partying and drinking at? People, unbelievable, the kind of things that Tyson fanboys will make up. So, was he in the greatest shape of all time against Buster Douglas? No, he wasn't. But he wasn't totally out of shape either. He was 220, right? Which is his normal fighting weight. He was 221 against Tony Tucker, 221 against Trevor Berbick when he was still with Kevin Rooney. 220 against Douglas. Wasn't in the greatest shape he's ever been in. But he wasn't in awful shape. He wasn't in as bad a shape as Mike Tyson fanboys try to make him out to be. And Buster Douglas didn't allow Mike Tyson to rest in the clinches. That was one of the big reasons why Buster Douglas was able to win the fight, is he continued punching and he didn't allow Mike Tyson to rest at all. He was fighting for 3 minutes of every round. And on the inside, he did tie Mike Tyson up very well, it has to be said. But on top of that, he fought a tactically good fight. He wasn't intimidated by Tyson. When Tyson wanted to rest on the inside, Douglas would continue throwing punches. He'd push Tyson off sometimes and hit him. Basically, he would fight when Mike Tyson didn't want to fight. And then he would tie Tyson up when Tyson did want to fight. Yeah, there was a controversial moment, apparently controversial in the 8th round, when Buster Douglas, against the run of play, when he was on the verge of stopping Tyson, Douglas was caught with a right uppercut, which deposited him on the canvas. Now, people say that Buster Douglas received a long count. Yeah, and people say that Buster Douglas received a much longer count than Mike Tyson received in the 10th, because Tyson was eventually knocked out in the 10th, okay? Douglas went down in the 8th, and they say that the counts were different. Douglas's count was really long, Tyson's count was really fast. This is complete BS. It's a lie. It's a total lie. The person who initially came up with this lie was Don King. And you see, this is the only time that Tyson fanboys ever trust anything that Don King says, because Tyson fanboys see Don King as the devil, and Don King was a terrible man. All right, put on some great cards over the years, but he was a terrible man. But they never trust Don King. But the one time they do trust Don King, oh so conveniently, is when Don King says that Douglas got a longer count than Tyson. But it's BS, it's not true. And this video right here proves it. Okay, go look up this video. Tyson versus Douglas, identical 10 counts. And you've got Larry Merchant talking about how the 10 counts were identical. In this video right here, Larry Merchant, after the Tyson Douglas fight, when he's got both of them in the studio together, the 10 count is analyzed and they actually find out that the 10 count is identical. So go watch either of those videos that I just pulled up and you'll see that Tyson's 10 count and Douglas's 10 count were exactly the same. Exactly the same. The only difference was when Buster Douglas got up after his count, he was fit enough to continue and it was the end of the round. Whereas when Mike Tyson got up, he was far, far, far more badly hurt than Buster Douglas was, so the referee waved it off. I mean, Mike Tyson had his gum shield in backwards when he got up. He was crawling around on the canvas. He was totally out of it. There's no way the referee could have allowed it to continue. Whereas Buster Douglas, he got up at like 9.5. He barely beat the count, but he was in good enough condition to continue. And it was the end of the round anyway. You know, so he was kind of saved by the bell. But anyway, Douglas beat the crap out of Mike Tyson in that fight, apart from the 8th round, which was, probably the only round he lost. And he was winning the round up until he was dropped in the final seconds of the round. He maybe Tyson maybe won one other round in the fight, but other than the 8th round and maybe one other round, Douglas was just beating the crap out of Tyson every round. Yeah, but somehow, just to show you how powerful Don King was back then and how ridiculous it was and how much of a protected fighter Tyson was by the boxing establishment. Yeah, I'm not saying Tyson was protected as in he was protected from tough competition. No, because he was taking on everybody back then. But in terms of the protection that he had from the establishment and Don King, look at the scores for the fight. I mean, this is shocking. Mike Tyson was ahead on one of the judges' scorecards. Ahead at the time that Douglas knocked him out in the 10th. What in the world was going on there? And then the other scorecard, it was a tie in the 10th round. Are you kidding? Mike Tyson won 2 rounds in this fight maximum. And that's 3 points with the knockdown. Okay? And that's if you're being generous. The rest of the rounds were all Buster Douglas and Buster Douglas big. But somehow, this guy had it a tie. This guy had Tyson ahead. Only this guy had a realistic scorecard. 82 to 88 in Douglas's favor. All right. That just shows you the corruption that was going on with regards to Don King. And then people trust Don King when he was trying to, lobby the sanctioning bodies to have Douglas stripped after the fight because he apparently had a long count. BS. That was just Don King crying over spilt milk because he just lost his cash cow. Yeah. And all the Tyson fanboys agreeing with him because they're fools. The reality is Douglas beat Mike Tyson fair and square. And it wasn't Tyson at his best, but it was Tyson still in his prime years, still at his prime age. He wasn't with Kevin Rooney anymore, but hey, was Kevin Rooney that great as a trainer? Mike Tyson once said of Kevin, because Mike Tyson had a lot of disdain for Kevin Rooney. I remember the interviews when Tyson came out of prison and they were asking him if he's going to join Rooney again. And Mike Tyson responded by saying, you know what? Some trainers, he said most trainers are just glorified cheerleaders. This is what Mike Tyson said. When referring to Kevin Rooney, he said most trainers are just glorified cheerleaders. And even when he was with Rooney, Mike Tyson basically said, I know just as much as Rooney, if not more. But Rooney is there to remind me of the things that I forget. Yeah, so this is the attitude that Tyson had. He didn't regard Rooney as some guru in training. Tyson felt like he knew more than Rooney, which is ultimately why he fired him. Or one of the reasons he fired him, one of the reasons why he felt Rooney was expendable. Yes, Rooney, perhaps, Don King was maybe advising him to fire Rooney, and also the fact that Rooney was getting involved in Mike Tyson's private life, etc. These are contributing factors as to why he fired him. But ultimately, if Rooney was so valuable to Mike Tyson as a trainer, he wouldn't have fired him. He would have worked out the differences and kept him on, but he didn't. Because Mike Tyson felt like he knew more than Rooney. And again, when he left Rooney, people act like you should disregard Tyson's career after he left Rooney. Why? So Mike Tyson is helpless without Kevin Rooney? How great can Tyson be if he gets rid of one trainer and then he completely collapses as a fighter? How great can he be? It's nonsense. And after Tyson came out of prison, again, they were asking him if he wanted to join Rooney. And he was like, no, I don't want to join Rooney. See, Tyson never really rated Rooney as highly as the public did. Bear that in mind. And before I forget, let me tell you something about Buster Douglas. Yeah? Because people say that Mike Tyson wasn't in shape for the Douglas fight, that Tyson had to lose loads of weight in training camp, etc., etc. Douglas had to lose loads of weight in training camp. How come Tyson is the only person who's allowed to have a bad training camp? When it comes to heavyweight champions, Tyson is the only one who's allowed to have a bad training camp and use that as an excuse for a poor performance or a loss. He's the only one who's allowed to do it. Lennox Lewis ain't allowed to do it. Holyfield ain't allowed to do it. It's only Tyson, according to the Tyson fanboys, who's allowed to have a bad camp and use that as an excuse for a loss or a poor performance. Well, Buster Douglas, coming into the fight, came down from nearly 300 pounds. Yeah, he weighed like 231 pounds against Mike Tyson. He came down from nearly 300 pounds. Not only that, the week of the fight, Buster Douglas had the flu. He was on penicillin medicine. Yeah, he was on penicillin, antibiotics, the week of the fight. Go do your research. Man was on antibiotics. Yeah. His mum died. His mum was his best friend. He was very close to his mum. His mum died a couple of weeks before the fight. The mother of his child was very sick with a serious illness during training camp as well. Everything that could have gone wrong in training camp for Buster Douglas did go wrong. And you want to use excuses for Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson wasn't the one who just lost his mum a couple of weeks before the fight. He wasn't the one going into the fight on penicillin with the flu. Yeah. Everything was against Buster Douglas from a physical point of view, from a psychological point of view, and in terms of officiating. Because Tyson blatantly had judges on his side in Don King's pocket. So why is it that Mike Tyson always gets a pass for having poor performances and it's always blamed on him having a bad camp and having to lose loads of weight? But yet his opponent, Buster Douglas, had an even worse camp for all intents and purposes. Yeah, it was in even tougher circumstances than Tyson was in, but yet he won the fight. Anyway, Buster Douglas fallout. He comes back in better shape against Henry Tillman. This was revenge for the 2 amateur defeats he suffered against Tillman. Tillman by this stage had been, knocked out a few times himself. Evander Holyfield had knocked out Henry Tillman down at cruiserweight because Tillman had turned professional at cruiserweight. So Henry Tillman, he blasted him out in the round. There was a good performance, big right hand. Tillman was all types of messed up. Knocked out Alex Stewart. That was actually a good fight, a good result, because Alex Stewart was a tough guy. Alex Stewart was a notoriously slow starter, though. Slow starter. Actually born in London, Alex Stewart. And if you ever hear Alex Stewart interviews after any of his fights in the 80s and 90s, you'll hear him. He still has kind of a London accent, Alex Stewart. I think he was born in Jamaica, raised in London. He's definitely of Jamaican descent. I'm not sure if he was born in Jamaica or born in London, but he certainly has a London accent anyway. But he learned his trade in terms of boxing in the US. So he gave George Foreman a very tough fight. He gave Holyfield 2 good workouts. Holyfield was never in any danger of losing those fights, but he did give him 2 good workouts. So Alex Stewart was a tough guy. That was actually a pretty good result for Mike Tyson, taking him out as quickly as he did, with Alex Stewart being a slow starter, Mike Tyson being a notoriously fast starter. Then Mike Tyson took on Donovan Razor Ruddock twice. And these were the 2 fights before Mike Tyson's stint in prison when he did 3.5 years for the rape of Denzel Washington. I keep on saying Denzel Washington, I said it in a previous video, Denzel Washington, Desiree Washington. People were laughing when I made that blunder, I slip of the tongue when I called her Denzel Washington instead of Desiree Washington. No, the rape of Desiree Washington, who was a Miss Black America Beauty pageant contestant. Now, we can go into the whole did he rape or did he not rape Desiree Washington thing. Personally, I find Desiree Washington to be a very suspicious character, because if you know some of the backstory about Desiree Washington, she had previously accused other people of rape. One of them, as far as I can remember, don't quote me on this, I don't want Desiree Washington out there suing me, all right? Allegedly, from what I've read, Desiree Washington accused, prior to accusing Tyson of rape, she'd accused 2 other people of rape, allegedly. Yeah, allegedly one of the people she accused of rape prior to accusing Tyson was a school teacher, and the other person she'd allegedly accused of rape was her own dad. This is what I've read over the years, okay, about Desiree Washington. And again, going up into Tyson's hotel room at 3 a.m. or wherever it was, what did you think they were going to do? Like, play Monopoly? Like, Tyson's bringing you up in his hotel room at that time of night. You know what's going down. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know what went on in that hotel room, and neither do you, for sure. We can only speculate, but I do find Desiree Washington's character a little questionable. That's what I will say. But one thing Mike Tyson has been very honest about is the fact that he has abused women in the past. He has. And Mike Tyson said he's done some things in his life which are so bad that he'll take them to the grave. He'll never talk about them publicly. So God knows what they were. All right. And he said he has taken advantage of women in the past, but he didn't take advantage of Desiree Washington. That's his way of describing it. So I guess he was philosophical about the fact that he got put in prison for 3.5 years because maybe he felt like he deserved it for other stuff he did and got away with it. Who knows? But anyway, he had the 2 fights with Razor Ruddock. Razor Ruddock was a pretty hyped up contender who hadn't beaten anybody of any serious note, but he was a big puncher. Razor Ruddock was athletic, and he was a guy who was one-handed. Razor Ruddock, he was not a 2-handed guy. He certainly didn't have much on his right hand. He didn't really have much of a jab in either of the Tyson fights, but he was athletic and he was a good puncher with the left hand, and he hung tough with Mike Tyson for 2 fights. And again, Razor Ruddock took Mike Tyson's best shots and went 18 rounds with the guy. Are you telling me Razor Ruddock has got a better chin and better durability than all the heavyweights around today? Because that's what the Tyson fanboys would have you believe, that there is nobody today who has the durability of a Razor Ruddock or a Frank Bruno or a Tyrell Biggs or a Tony Tucker or a Pinklon Thomas or a James Smith or a Jose Roberto or a Mitch Greene or a James Tillis or a Jesse Ferguson or etc., etc., etc. right? You get the picture. The Tyson fanboys would have you believe that there is nobody around today who's as durable as any of the names I've mentioned in the heavyweight division. It's madness. It's not realistic, is it, to think like that? Anyway, the two Razor Ruddock fights were good fights, competitive fights. Ultimately, Tyson was just far too good for Razor Ruddock. He was far too sharp. He did get hit with a lot of shots in both fights. I thought Mike Tyson was actually sharper in the first fight. In the second fight, I think he was maybe a little bit overtrained, because there was very little space between the two fights. There was only, they were 3 months apart. Very little space between the fights. 2 tough training camps. So basically, he would have finished the first Ruddock fight, then had a couple of weeks rest, and then gone straight back into a training camp for the other Ruddock fight. I think he was overtrained for the rematch, to be honest with you, because to me, he was sharper in the first fight than he was in the second fight, even though it was around the same weight. To me, he just needed a rest. And he took more punishment in the rematch than he did in the first fight. But still, 2 good fights. Razor Ruddock went on to, get starched in 2 rounds by Lennox Lewis after picking up a couple of victories over Greg Page and Phil Jackson, which were 2 good stoppage victories for Razor Ruddock, and then he got knocked out by Lennox Lewis in 2 rounds at Earl's Court. Then Mike Tyson, as I say, had the Desiree Washington rape case, and he went to prison for 3.5 years. And all the boxing publications at the time were ever talking about during the 3.5 years that Mike Tyson was in prison is, when is Mike Tyson going to get out? Oh, the heavyweight division is so terrible. Oh, we can't wait for Mike Tyson to come back. These guys can't fight. You had these journalists like Mike Katz and all these other dudes talking about, oh, the heavyweight division is in dire straits. None of these guys can fight. Lennox Lewis is a paper champion. Riddick Bowe is this. Riddick Bowe's okay, but he has an eating problem. Evander Holyfield's a blown up cruiserweight with heart problems, and I don't mean heart as in courage. I'm talking about heart as in Holyfield actually had a problem with his heart physically, and some people have said that might have been linked to PEDs. But yeah, so the boxing journalists at the time and all the boxing publications were just lamenting about how terrible the heavyweight division was, and they couldn't wait till Mike Tyson comes back to restore some order to the heavyweight division. Anyway, Mike Tyson comes back in 95. He came out of prison and he weighed about 180 pounds when he came out of prison. He was very small. And even when he was in court, there were several people who saw him in court, including Bob Arum. And he said Mike Tyson looked like a cruiserweight. He looked like he was 180, 190 pounds. So he came out of prison very, very light. He lost a lot of muscle mass for whatever reason. But within a couple of months after coming out of prison in 1995, he was back up to 220 pounds again. So he gained like 30 pounds of muscle in a very short space of time. You come to your own conclusions about why that was. All right. Then he fought Peter McNeely. He, knocked Peter McNeely out. And in terms of the shape that Mike Tyson was in, that's the most shredded Mike Tyson has ever been. He was completely shredded against Peter McNeely, in tremendous condition. And yeah, McNeely pushed Mike Tyson to the ropes, landed a few shots, but Tyson was far too skilled and far too fast for him, took him out. And this was also, it is registered as a DQ win. It is actually registered as a DQ. It was a DQ because Vinny Vecchione, who was Peter McNeely's trainer, jumped in the ring. And that's when the fight was called off. That's why it was a disqualification rather than a KO. But yeah, that was a nice return. I remember the fight very clearly against Pete McNeely. I remember watching it. And I was very excited. I was a Mike Tyson fan during these times. I'm still a Mike Tyson fan. And I still like Mike Tyson. I think he's one of the most exciting and entertaining fighters of all time, and the most exciting heavyweight of all time, no question. I was very excited when he fought Peter McNeely. Then he fought Buster Mathis Jr. And people were questioning his performance against Mathis Jr. Mathis Jr. was a very slippery guy, and he was obviously the son of the famous Buster Mathis Sr., the guy who fought Muhammad Ali and, Joe Frazier, etc. in the 70s. And yeah, some people were not too impressed with his performance against Buster Mathis Jr. And I remember Gary Mason, who was doing pundit work for Sky at the time, was saying that, Frank Bruno's got a good chance against Mike Tyson, because Frank Bruno had just won the WBC heavyweight title against Oliver McCall, right? And I remember Gary Mason saying, yeah, he didn't look too good against Buster Mathis. Maybe Frank has got a chance. But as good a pundit as Gary Mason was, RIP Gary Mason was a very good pundit. He was a bit biased because he was good friends with Frank Bruno. He was Frank Bruno's sparring partner for many times and a good friend of Frank's. So I think he was, looking on the bright side a little bit when he was talking about Frank Bruno's chances against Tyson in the rematch after the Buster Mathis Jr. fight. But yeah, he did get hit with some shots against Buster Mathis Jr. He didn't look particularly amazing. Buster Mathis Jr. managed to kind of smother Tyson and get some shots off. Buster Mathis Jr. had absolutely no power, by the way. None. He was really feather-fisted. One of the most feather-fisted heavyweights you'll ever see was Buster Mathis Jr. And 2 of Buster Mathis Jr.'s most famous fights were the Tyson fight and also when he fought Riddick Bowe. And he actually won the Riddick Bowe fight on a disqualification. He was knocked out in the Riddick Bowe fight because Riddick Bowe hit him while he was down on his knee. Actually, was it disqualification? Did he win? Or was it a no contest? It should have been a disqualification. I think it was actually a no contest. Let me check Buster Mathis's record here. Yeah, no contest with Riddick Bowe. But that really should have been a disqualification because, you know, Bowe blatantly hit him when he was down. And that was really disgusting. You know, really, really terrible, terrible thing with Riddick Bowe. Riddick Bowe claims he didn't know the guy was down. I don't believe it. I think he knew he was down on the knee and he hit him with a right hook because Buster Mathis was frustrating Riddick Bowe as well. Yeah, Buster Mathis had very good head movement. Let that be said for Buster Mathis. Very good head movement, a tricky, slick inside fighter, but just no punching power at all. And eventually Mike Tyson got to him and knocked him out in the third with a very impressive move, actually. Tyson in this Buster Mathis fight was showing some nice footwork where he was stepping off to his left and firing off right hooks. You know, stepping off to his left really quickly and firing off these right hooks to catch Mathis by surprise. And that's eventually what happened. Mathis actually had Tyson up against the ropes, but Tyson moved out to his left really quickly and he cracked Mathis with like 2 or 3 solid right hooks, dropped him. And, you know, Mathis did get to his feet, but not in time and the referee waved it off. Then he fought Frank Bruno for the second time. Bruno was a lot heavier in the rematch than he was in the first fight. Bruno was WBC heavyweight champion at this point. Mike Tyson walked through Frank Bruno, beat the crap out of him, and eventually dropped him, and the fight was waved off in the third. Frank Bruno did far better in the first fight against Mike Tyson than he did in the second fight, despite the fact that people say Tyson wasn't as good in the second fight and it was past his best when he dealt with Frank Bruno far easier in the second fight. And Bruno was better. The best Frank Bruno has ever looked was in the Lennox Lewis fight. That was Frank Bruno at his absolute peak. Okay? In the Oliver McCall fight, that was a tough fight for Bruno, but that was Bruno at his peak. I do think Bruno came in too heavy though against Mike Tyson in the rematch, and that was one of the reasons that Bruno didn't do as good as he did in the first fight with Mike Tyson. But also, I think Bruno felt more pressure in the Mike Tyson rematch because of the fact that he was champion. You see, going into the first fight with Mike Tyson, there was no pressure because nobody expected Bruno to win. Not even the British expected Bruno to win. Most of the British. But in the rematch, I think Bruno felt more pressure, you know, from his countrymen and his own people around him that he should be beating Mike Tyson. And he just looked scared to death going into the rematch with Tyson. And, you know, Tyson dealt with him accordingly. So he dealt with Bruno, blasted him out of there, a very frightened Frank Bruno. Then he dealt with Bruce Seldon in the round. Bruce Seldon was from Atlantic City. So he captured the WBC from Bruno, captured the WBA from Seldon. Seldon was just absolutely petrified. Seldon went down from punches which shouldn't be knocking anybody down, you know. He really didn't take anything particularly solid from Tyson, and he pretended that he was more hurt than he was. And the commentators figured this out at the time. That when Seldon went down from a left hook, the second knockdown, went down from a left hook from Tyson. The first knockdown, the punch didn't even hit Seldon. It grazed the top of his head and Seldon went down. And Seldon always had a problem with anxiety. You know, when he fought Riddick Bowe, he was stopped in the first round and he was scared to death in the Riddick Bowe fight. But at least Riddick Bowe hit him with some proper punches. But against Tyson, he didn't even get hit with anything real serious. He basically just quit in the fight. Yeah, after the second knockdown, he got to his feet. He was in the corner and the referee was looking like he was going to allow Seldon to continue. Then Seldon shook his head and then started wobbling all over the place. It's like, come on, you just wanted to quit. You just wanted the referee to stop it. That's what it was, because he was terrified. So that was an example of somebody being terrified of Mike Tyson and not really fighting with any heart at all. Then the Evander Holyfield fight took place in 1996, November 9th. Very few people gave Holyfield a chance. Holyfield at this point was coming off a win over Bobby Ches, which people say was not a particularly impressive win against Bobby Ches. Bobby Ches was a guy who was a light heavyweight and super middleweight earlier on in his career. I think he was as low as super middleweight. And Holyfield didn't look particularly good against Bobby Ches. Bobby Ches accused Holyfield of putting some kind of substance on his gloves and blinding him. Well, Bobby Ches used to talk a lot of rubbish back in the days. I never really cared for Bobby Ches as a commentator or as a human being. He just talked so much crap, Bobby Ches. Just a fool of a man, I always felt he was. But anyway, Holyfield didn't look particularly impressive against Ches. And prior to the Ches fights, he'd obviously fought Riddick Bowe. You know, he'd been stopped by Riddick Bowe in the third fight, and he looked terrible against Riddick Bowe in the third fight. And people really felt like Evander Holyfield was finished after the third fight against Riddick Bowe, because that was the first time he got knocked out. And he had a problem with his heart. You know, he had health issues. So he was coming off health issues and, you know, an unimpressive, where are we at now? Unimpressive fight against Bobby Ches. Yeah, so he was stopped by Riddick Bowe in 8, fought Bobby Ches. People didn't think it was that impressive. Then he was going into the Tyson fight. And Holyfield was actually getting get well soon cards sent to him by members of the public before he went in there with Tyson for the first time. This is how much the Tyson hype was. This is how big the Tyson hype was. You know, Holyfield, when Buster Douglas fought Tyson, he was a 42-1 underdog. Holyfield was like a 25 to something underdog when he fought Mike Tyson. Yeah, crazy, crazy odds. That's how big that Tyson hype was at the time. Now, Holyfield was past his best. This is another thing that Mike Tyson fanboys won't tell you. They'll say, oh, Tyson was past his best when he fought Holyfield. Well, Holyfield was past his best too. He had health problems. He'd been knocked out, coming off unimpressive performances, and he was older than Tyson. He was like 4 years older than Tyson. He was 34 at the time when he fought Mike Tyson. Tyson was 30. They don't tell you the fact that Holyfield was past his best. You see, Holyfield managed to pick up good wins when he was past his best. Lennox Lewis managed to pick up good wins when he was past his best. You know, and when I say good wins, I mean wins against all-time greats. Yeah? When Holyfield was past his best, he picked up a win against Mike Tyson, who was an all-time great. When Lennox Lewis was past his best, he picked up a win over Vitaly Klitschko, who was an all-time great. Which all-time greats did Mike Tyson pick up wins against when he was past his best? 0. I'm only speaking facts. All right? I'm only speaking facts. So all these, Muhammad Ali picked up wins against all-time greats when he was past his best. Muhammad Ali beat Joe Frazier, an all-time great when he was past his best. He beat George Foreman, a prime George Foreman, an all-time great when he was past his best. But yet Mike Tyson has no all-time greats on his resume when he was past his best. 0. Facts. I'm not lying. All right? Try and dispute what I'm saying. You can't. So anyway, first Holyfield fight. Holyfield just fought a very, very good fight against Tyson. You know, nothing, you know, and here's the thing. Mike Tyson, when he came out of prison, from his own mouth, said he was hitting harder after he came out of prison than he was before he went into prison. From Mike Tyson's own mouth, he said that. And we do know that, you know, as the old adage goes in boxing, punching power is the last thing to go. He hit Holyfield with all his best shots. But Holyfield, to be fair, was good at half blocking, half grazing the shots, not taking the shots completely flush. There was an uppercut, I think it was in, what was it, the 5th round or 6th or 7th round, somewhere around the middle of the fight. There was an uppercut that Tyson hit Holyfield with that did seem to get Holyfield's attention and back him up, all right, momentarily. But other than that, Holyfield was never bothered by anything Tyson hit him with. And Holyfield did have a good chin, but Holyfield had been down in his career. Holyfield had been badly hurt by Burt Cooper, a journeyman, earlier on in his career. He'd been badly hurt by Riddick Bowe in the first fight and knocked out by Riddick Bowe in the 3rd fight. Are we saying that there's nobody in heavyweight boxing today that has as good a chin as Evander Holyfield? Really? Holyfield was seriously hurt by Burt Cooper. Knocked out by Riddick Bowe. You're telling me that nobody in the heavyweight division today hits as hard as Riddick Bowe? I'm telling you they do. I'm telling you there are plenty of guys in the heavyweight division today who hit just as hard, if not harder, than Riddick Bowe. Plenty of guys in the heavyweight division today have got the power to hurt an Evander Holyfield or knock him out. The power. Not saying they would necessarily land it on him, but they have the power to be able to do it if they land it. All right? But yet Holyfield was able to take Mike Tyson's shots no problem. Couldn't take all these other guys' shots, you know, well, a couple of other guys' shots who knocked him out, but he took Tyson's shots. So how great was Tyson's punching power really? Is he really just going to steam through the heavyweight division today, no problem, just tap every guy once on the chin and the fight's over? It's not realistic. Go back and look at Tyson's career, watch the fights. Plenty of guys were able to take his shots, including an over-the-hill Holyfield, who'd already been knocked out by Riddick Bowe and hurt very badly by Burt Cooper. He was able to take Tyson's shots. So he fought a very good fight against Tyson, dropped him in the 6th round with a left hook to the chest, beat him up, fought when Mike Tyson wanted to rest, rested when Mike Tyson wanted to fight. The barrage that he hit Tyson with at the end of the 10th round was, a tremendous barrage. It reminded me of the Burt Cooper fight, actually, because Holyfield was unloading on Burt Cooper the same way he was unloading on Tyson, just uppercuts and hooks all over the place. And, Tyson was looking like Burt Cooper when Cooper fought Holyfield in the latter stages of that fight. Tyson fanboys complain about headbutts. I mean, don't give me that. Tyson was trying to headbutt Holyfield in the fight. Tyson was cut in the fight, and then he tried to headbutt Holyfield to make his own cut worse and also, damage Holyfield in the process, hoping that Holyfield would get disqualified or, the fight would go to the cards or Tyson was looking for a way out in the first Holyfield fight. You go watch it. When he blatantly bores his head in and tries to go for Holyfield with the head. The only person who blatantly headbutted in the fight was Mike Tyson. Facts. Not Holyfield. Holyfield was maybe reckless with the head. But look, when you're fighting on the inside with a fighter, you're supposed to keep your chin down. You're not supposed to have your chin in the air. You're supposed to keep your chin down. Where if your chin's down, then that means your forehead is going to be close to your opponent, right? So when you're fighting on the inside, you're bumping and boring, people are going to get cut. And again, don't talk to me about dirty fighters when Mike Tyson was dirty even in his prime, hitting guys when they're on the floor, hitting guys on the break, hitting guys after the bell, elbowing guys. Tyson was doing this in his prime. And then after he came out of prison, he was doing all kinds of stuff. He bit Holyfield in the rematch. He tried to break Franz Botha's arm. He hit Orlin Norris after the bell. Lou Savarese, he carried on hitting Savarese after the referee waved it off and even dropped John Coyle, the referee, in that fight. Come on. You want to talk about dirty fighter. Mike Tyson was a dirty fighter. Same thing with Kevin McBride. He tried to break Kevin McBride's arm too. Mike Tyson was one of the dirtiest heavyweights around. Don't talk to me about dirty fighter. All right. So it was a legitimate win for Holyfield in the first fight. Beat the crap out of Tyson. And remember, going back to the amateur days when Holyfield sparred Tyson, where they were just, amateurs, and Holyfield only weighed 175 pounds. Tyson was 25 pounds heavier, and Tyson couldn't take him out in one round then. When he had 25-pound weight advantage. When they fought as professionals, Tyson was still the heavier, but not that much heavier, Holyfield just had his number. And in the rematch, one of the most significant things with Tyson is Tyson always tried to intimidate opponents. Tyson was a big guy for the stare down, all right? Throughout Tyson's career, he'd try and stare you down and intimidate you before the first bell is gone. He'd try and stare you down and intimidate you at the weigh-in, at the press conferences, and all that kind of stuff. That was Tyson's thing. And he tried to stare Holyfield down in the first fight. Holyfield just looked in his eye, not at the weigh-in and the press conferences before the fight. That's when Holyfield didn't look Tyson in the eye. But when it came to actually coming together before the opening bell for the first fight, Holyfield looked Tyson in the eye. He wasn't looking away, but Tyson was trying his best to intimidate him. But it was significant that in the rematch, you go look at the rematch before the opening bell when the referee brings them both together, Mills Lane. Tyson couldn't look Holyfield in the eye. He was intimidated. He realized that Holyfield had his number. Tyson was actually defeated before the fight even took place. Mentally, he was defeated because Holyfield had got in his head. Holyfield had put a beating on him. And, Tyson had never had to come back and fight a rematch with somebody who'd, put a beating on him right away. So it wasn't like going in there with a different opponent. It was going in there with a guy who'd beaten him from pillar to post the previous fight. Tyson psychologically couldn't deal with it, and he couldn't even look Holyfield in the eye during the pre-fight instructions given by the referee. That was significant. Tyson came out, he was in much better shape in the rematch than he was in the first fight. You see, 218 as opposed to 222. He was ripped for the Holyfield rematch, and in fact, I did say he was in the best shape of his career in the McNeely fight in terms of aesthetically being just shredded, but the Holyfield rematch was close too, because he was shredded in the Holyfield rematch as well. But he came out in the first round. He was with Rich Giacchetti at this point because, when he came out of prison, he was with Aaron Snow and Jay Bright. Or maybe it was just Jay Bright. Was he with Aaron Snow after he came out of prison? I know he was with Aaron Snow and Jay Bright from the Bruno fight to the Douglas fight. And then he was with Richie Giacchetti from the Tillman fight through the two Ruddock fights. Then he went to prison. Then he came out. Then he was with Jay Bright. I can't remember if Aaron Snow was in his corner anymore or it was just Jay Bright. It might have been just Jay Bright when he came out of prison for the McNeely, Mathis, and Bruno, Selden, Holyfield first fight. It might have just been Jay Bright. But anyway, for the second Holyfield fight, he was with Rich Giacchetti, who, he was with for the Ruddock fights, etc. And everybody felt like Rich Giacchetti was the next best choice for Tyson other than rejoining Rooney, because Tyson really just never reconciled with Rooney. Even to this day, I don't think Tyson and Rooney have ever reconciled. But people saw Rich Giacchetti as the next best choice for Mike Tyson as far as a trainer to replace Rooney, but it didn't help. Tyson came out in the first round against Holyfield. He was moving his head. He was jabbing and moving his head, but it didn't make any difference. Tyson was scared. You can see in the first round that Tyson was intimidated by Holyfield, and Holyfield was able to get combinations off against Tyson in the first round and back him up to the ropes. And you could see that Tyson realized that it was going to be the same as the first fight all over again. And Tyson blamed it on headbutts, and he said, oh, Holyfield headbutted me and I was cut and all this kind of business. Well, there was scar tissue on Tyson from the first fight, which did open up in the rematch. But look, people fight through cuts in many fights. You know, you look at Vitaly Klitschko when he fought Lennox Lewis, he fought through cuts. You know, Lennox Lewis was cut in the Vitaly Klitschko fight. He fought through cuts. Many fighters have fought through cuts and won fights. Yeah. If you're that much better than somebody and you're in much better shape in the rematch, as Tyson definitely was against Holyfield in the rematch, you fight through it. You know? But no, Mike Tyson wanted out. And he left his corner at the start of the third round without his gum shield in. And then he had to call him back to put his gum shield in, because he actually left it without the gum shield because he had every intention of biting Holyfield. Yeah, and that's what happened. He bit Holyfield on the ear. I remember watching this live at the time. I was horribly disappointed. I was hoping for a really good fight. I was hoping maybe there could be redemption for Mike Tyson, because trust me, I was shocked when Holyfield beat Mike Tyson the first time. I thought Mike Tyson was going to walk through Holyfield the first time around. That's what I thought. I thought he was going to walk through him, because I'd seen Holyfield knocked out by Riddick Bowe. I thought his best days were behind him. He was a small heavyweight like Michael Spinks. I thought Mike Tyson would walk through him. And in fact, let me tell you something for a fact here. When Mike Tyson came out of prison and he was knocking out, you know, the likes of Bruno and Seldon, many, many people, including Barry McGuigan, many American journalists and celebrities and people within boxing were saying that Mike Tyson was actually better after he came out of prison than he was before he went into prison. Yeah, better. The only person I remember at the time saying Mike Tyson wasn't better was Teddy Atlas. And Teddy Atlas was actually saying it before Tyson came out of prison. Teddy Atlas was saying they're going to market it as if Tyson's better than he ever was. But he's not going to be better, because he wasn't the same guy when he went into prison. So he's not going to be the same guy when he comes out of prison. He's going to be worse. Teddy Atlas was the only person saying that. But everybody else was saying, oh, Tyson's better. All the Tyson fanboys were saying he was better. All the Tyson fanboys who claim like they're experts, who were around at the time watching Tyson fight, they were all saying he was better after prison than he was before prison, prior to losing to Holyfield in the first fight. Yeah? But then they changed their minds, and it's all revisionism once now he's washed up because he's lost. It's ridiculous. He was only washed up when he lost. But prior to him losing, everyone's saying he's better than ever. Ridiculous. And many prominent people in boxing were saying he was better than ever prior to losing the first fight to Holyfield. Anyway, in the Holyfield rematch, better shape, but Holyfield just had his number. Tyson resorted to biting because he knew he couldn't beat Holyfield. Got himself disqualified. He had a ban after that, rightly so. He eventually came back against Francois Botha. The Botha fight, Tyson was behind on points. He tried to break Botha's arm. You know, he was resorting to all these dirty tactics. Botha wasn't fighting dirty, but Mike Tyson was fighting dirty. Tried to break Botha's arm in a clinch. And you had Bobby Ches, this unbelievable Mike Tyson fanboy. Bobby Ches was always a massive Mike Tyson fanboy. Just a shameless fanboy, Bobby Ches. And Bobby Ches was trying to blame Francois Botha for Mike Tyson being dirty in the fight, saying, oh, you know, Botha's holding too much. Botha wasn't even holding that much. And in fact, Ferdy Pacheco, who was co-commentating with Bobby Ches, Ferdy Pacheco had to pull Bobby Ches up and say, no, hang on, Bobby. Franz Botha's fighting a good fight here. He's fighting a good fight. Like, you know, you're making out as though he's just holding and not doing anything. No, he's fighting a good fight. And Bobby Ches had to fix up and admit, okay, yeah, Botha's fighting a good fight. Just unbelievable what a fanboy Bobby Ches was. It made me sick. And back then there were so many fanboys. Let me tell you, one of the biggest fanboys at the time of Mike Tyson was a British footballer called Vinnie Jones. All right. Some of you who are of a certain age who used to follow football, you remember Vinnie Jones. I mean, I was never really a big football person, but, you know, I did know who Vinnie Jones was. And I remember Vinnie Jones being on television. I think this was actually prior to the first Holyfield fight. I remember Vinnie Jones saying that Mike Tyson is the hardest man in the world. So basically he was saying that Mike Tyson is invincible in hand-to-hand combat against any man in the world. And he was not alone. Don't think that Vinnie Jones was alone in believing this. There were I'm telling you now, millions of people worldwide who believed that Mike Tyson was invincible in hand-to-hand combat. Can you imagine I mean, even the most hardcore Deontay Wilder fanboy today is not going to tell you that he's invincible in hand-to-hand combat. But at the time, the Mike Tyson fanboys were so hardcore, they believed the man was literally invincible in hand-to-hand combat against any man on the planet. Incredible. And, you know, Vinnie Jones was one of them. And Vinnie Jones used to have his hair cut like Mike Tyson and all that kind of stuff. Whatever. There's loads of people who used to do that, by the way. So anyway, Francois Botha, it was a great punch. One of the best punches of Mike Tyson's career was when he knocked out Francois Botha. It was a straight right hand. He was behind in the fight, but he pulled out a tremendous straight right hand out of nowhere. It barely traveled 6 inches, the right hand. It landed on Francois Botha's chin, and you know, he was finished. So it was a great finish by Tyson, and you know, terrible, dirty tactics by Tyson in that fight, but he did manage to finish the fight clean with a right hand and come from behind on the scorecards. Then there was the All-In Norris fight. You know, not really much to say about that fight. That was one of the first fights where Tyson had twists in his hair. So it's like he was growing locks for that fight. He had twists in his hair, I think. Or did he have an afro? Maybe he had an afro for that, and then he had a twist for the Julius Francis fight. I can't remember now. I can't remember which way around it was. But anyway, he fought All-In Norris. It ended up being a no contest. He hit him after the bell. Norris went down. Yeah, no contest. Should have been a disqualification, really. Then he fought Julius Francis. This fight was famous in the UK. It was the first time that Mike Tyson fought in the UK at the MEN Arena in Manchester. Julius Francis tried his best to not be intimidated by Mike Tyson, talking about the fact that he'd been to prison too, the fact that he'd been stabbed and all this kind of stuff. This is around the time when Mike Tyson actually came to my hometown of Brixton, and he was mobbed in the streets of Brixton. You know, Brixton came out, and oh my days, everybody was just swarming all over Mike Tyson, and he was mobbed by so many people who wanted to see him. Thousands of people on the streets of Brixton wanted to see him because he was just walking around in the streets of Brixton. Thousands of people mobbed him, you know, and Tyson actually had to take refuge in Brixton police station because all these people came out. You know, Brixton back then was a predominantly black neighborhood, a very rough neighborhood at the time. Back in the year 2000, that was when Brixton was really rough, you know, a proper ghetto back then. And Tyson was just walking around in the street, you know, like one of the people, because Tyson was a ghetto kid himself, and people really appreciated that in Brixton. But Tyson was kind of a little bit, you know, disturbed by the fact that he got mobbed to the level that he had, you know, and he had to hide in the police station. But anyway, he went on and he fought Julius Francis. Julius Francis actually sold advertising space on the soles of his boots to the Sun newspaper. Was it the Sun or the Mirror? One of the newspapers. He sold advertising space on the soles of his boots. So he had like the Sun or the Mirror printed on the soles of his boots. And they paid him like several tens of thousands of pounds to advertise on the bottom of his boots. And he said, yeah, I'll take that money because you ain't going to see the bottom of my boots because I'm going to win this fight. But Julius Francis obviously didn't win the fight. Tyson took him out in good fashion. Then he fought in the UK again in Glasgow. He fought Lou Savarese. He hit Savarese within seconds of the fight, starting with a left hook to the head. And Savarese went down. He crumpled to the floor. Savarese got up, but he was in, you know, terrible shape. Tyson continued his assault, and referee tried to wave it off, but Tyson continued his attack and actually dropped referee John Coyle before Tyson eventually calmed down, and you know, the fight was stopped. But interestingly enough, Mike Tyson later on admitted that he was actually high on cocaine for the Lou Savarese fight. You know, God knows who sold Mike Tyson cocaine in Glasgow. But somebody sold him cocaine because Tyson said he was high on cocaine, and he said he used something called a Wizinator or something like that, which is basically a fake penis. Yeah, he used to trick the British Border Boxing Control drug testers. Because when they came, he had this like fake penis, which is, it has some kind of bag attached to it, which is full of urine, someone else's urine. And then you pee into the cup with the fake penis, that you pull out your trousers, and then you give it to the, the drug testing people, and they take it away and they test it, and they're not going to find any cocaine. Cocaine is a stimulant, okay? Cocaine is not the ideal drug to use if you want to enhance your performance, but it is a stimulant. And Mike Tyson said he circumvented drug testing many times using his Wizinator, right? This fake penis. And he even said that prior to going to prison, there were times when he was, taking cocaine prior to prison, where he was, he had cocaine in his system going into fights. And Savarese fight, the way he behaved, this is after the Savarese fight, is when he said that he wanted to eat Lennox Lewis's children, because Lennox Lewis was world champion at the time. They were, closing in on a Lennox Lewis showdown. And yeah, he said he wanted to eat Lennox Lewis's children. And just backtracking a little bit, when Mike Tyson won his WBC title from Frank Bruno, Lennox Lewis was the mandatory challenger. Mike Tyson actually paid, between the Bruno and the Holyfield fights, he was supposed to fight Lennox Lewis, but he actually paid Lennox Lewis to step aside. Yeah, Lewis was a mandatory challenger. He paid Lennox Lewis something like $4 million to step aside. Let that be known. For those who said, for the Tyson fanboys who said Lennox Lewis ducked Mike Tyson when Tyson came out of prison, not true. Tyson actually paid Lewis $4 million to step aside. Facts. Go look it up. All right. Anyway, the showdown with Lewis was approaching eventually when he fought Savarese, because this is obviously in Lewis's country, in the United Kingdom. Although it was in Scotland, Lewis is from England rather than Scotland. But still, he dealt with Savarese. He said he'd eat his children after the fight. This was actually promoted by Frank Warren. Yeah, Frank Warren was part of this promotion. Was Frank Warren also part of the Julius Francis promotion? Maybe he was. I know he was part of the Lou Savarese. Yeah, it was Frank Warren. So Frank Warren did both of Mike Tyson's fights. The Lou Savarese fight as well. But this is the fight where Frank Warren fell out with Mike Tyson. And Frank Warren appeared ringside for the Lou Savarese fight with kind of a black eye. And there was a lot of speculation going on that Mike Tyson had actually given Frank Warren the black eye. And one of the issues that Frank Warren had with Mike Tyson, and Frank Warren don't like Mike Tyson after this incident, one of the issues that Frank Warren had with Mike Tyson is that Mike Tyson bought some kind of watch, a very expensive watch from like Bond Street or somewhere in the UK, and he tried to bill Frank Warren for it. He tried to put it on Frank Warren's tab, and Frank Warren wasn't happy about that. And they got into some kind of argument or whatever, and allegedly Mike Tyson hit him, and that's how Frank Warren ended up with a black eye when he was at ringside. Anyway, then he fought Andrew Golota, and the Golota fight was seen as the two bad boys of heavyweight boxing clashing, and a lot of people were kind of anticipating something crazy happening in the Golota fight because of the fact that both guys had been involved in all kinds of dirtiness in the past, dirty tactics, illegal tactics. Golota had been disqualified a couple of times against Riddick Bowe for persistent low blows, and Golota had done other crazy things in other fights. I remember when he was on the way up, when he was undefeated contender, and he fought Samson Pujar, and he bit Samson Pujar in the shoulder, and he did many other crazy things in fights, Andrew Golota. So he was an unstable character. And then Mike Tyson had obviously bitten Evander Holyfield, and he was already known as a dirty fighter, even in his prime, Mike Tyson. But after coming out of prison and after the Holyfield fight, I've already described some of the things that he did against Francois Botha, etc. So yeah, people were wondering in the Golota fight who was gonna snap first, basically, out of the two of them. And interestingly enough, this fight got declared a no contest because Mike Tyson tested positive for marijuana. And I actually remember reading stories about Mike Tyson being on the beach, playing on the beach, somewhere, wherever he was training. In fact, no, was it the Golota fight? Or it might have been the Lewis fight. It was either in the lead up to the Golota fight or the lead up to the Lewis fight, where people said they saw Mike Tyson on the beach somewhere in America smoking marijuana with some kids. Yeah. And so Mike Tyson tests positive here for marijuana. But he managed to defeat Andrew Golota. It was quite a methodical performance from Tyson. He wasn't coming steaming out and all that type of business. But if he still had marijuana in his system, that might explain why he wasn't as hyperactive and hyper aggressive as usual, because of the fact that, marijuana tends to chill you out. So yeah, he managed to beat Andrew Golota in 2 rounds. Golota quit, and he changed it from a TKO to a no contest because of marijuana, because Golota quit at the end of the 2nd round. He refused to come out for the start of the 3rd round. And his trainer, Roger Bloodworth, who was training him at the time? I think it was Roger Bloodworth. And anyway, his trainers were disgusted with him, Andrew Golota. And Golota complained after the fight about a headbutt. He said, Tyson headbutted me and this, that, and the other. And, Tyson might have been reckless with his head. But again, Tyson was reckless with his head in many fights, just like Holyfield was reckless with his head. But again, Holyfield gets vilified for being reckless with his head, but Tyson don't. Tyson can walk on water and turn water into wine, and he's, the resurrection of Jesus. That's who Mike Tyson is to Tyson fanboys. As far as they're concerned, he's never done anything dirty in the ring ever. And the only dirty things he's ever done in the ring were justified. This is how they carry on, even in his prime, when he was hitting people after the bell and, elbowing people in the mouth and hitting people while they were down. All these guys deserved it, apparently. I remember when he fought Don Halpin, right? And Mike Tyson described it as he broke Don Halpin's nose in half when Don Halpin was on the ground. Yeah? There's so many times in Mike Tyson's career he could have been disqualified for the stuff he was doing. But, again, Tyson fanboys give him a pass because it's only other fighters who get vilified for being dirty. Tyson can never be vilified for that. Oh, no. Don't blame Tyson for ever doing anything dirty. But anyway, I'm not saying he was intentionally headbutting Andrew Golotto, though I think there was one headbutt. There was one clash of heads in the Golotto fight, which that looked a little questionable to me from Mike Tyson. Like maybe there was some intention behind it. But mostly the stuff he was doing with his head, I don't think it was intentional. It's just because he's a short guy. He's coming in with his chin tucked down. And so obviously the top of his head is going to be in your face if you're 6'4" like Andrew Golotto. All right. And that's what happens. Same thing with Holyfield when he was on the inside against fighters. Of course, he's got his head down. Even when he fought Tyson, he was actually trying to get underneath Tyson. That was one of Holyfield's tactics, is get underneath the guy. I forgot to talk about Holyfield from a tactical point of view so much in terms of what he did against Mike Tyson. But one of the things he did, he actually got underneath Tyson. You see, Tyson's not used to somebody getting underneath him. Holyfield might have looked at the Buster Mathis Jr. fight and saw Buster Mathis having success getting underneath Tyson. Tyson's usually the one who's getting underneath you. And what I mean underneath is coming in low, right, underneath your shots, where Holyfield was able to do that with Tyson a lot of the time in the fight. Sometimes it was on the outside, sometimes it was on the inside. Holyfield was mixing it up. Anyway, the Andrew Golotto fight, good win for Tyson, on the comeback trail. He managed to defeat Andrew Golotto. His next fight was Brian Nielsen. Now, this fight was interesting because Mike Tyson decided to pump a load of weights going into the Brian Nielsen fight. The fight took place in Copenhagen, in Denmark, and Tyson came in 239 and 3/4 pounds. That's basically 240. Yeah, 240 pounds for a 5'10" guy who was, what was he at the time? 30-something years old, 35, 36. I don't know what he was. Too heavy for a guy at that age, but you wonder what was going through Mike Tyson's mind when he was trying to put on all this muscle at this age, and he started liking weights in prison because prior to prison, Mike Tyson wasn't, according to him, he wasn't really a weights man. But in prison, he started gaining, a bit of a love for weights, as so many people do when they go in prison. After prison, he was still messing with weights. Even in the Holyfield rematch, he was doing weights and all that kind of stuff. Not too much because he wasn't, his weight for most of these fights wasn't much different than when he was in his prime. All right. See, when he came out, 219, 220, 219, 222, 218. So he wasn't particularly big. He wasn't probably doing, lighter weights with a lot of reps, perhaps, rather than few reps and heavy weights, which is what I understand puts on muscle more quickly. But certainly for the Brian Nielsen fight, he came in way heavier than he'd ever done previously. That was his career heaviest throughout his whole career, I think. I don't think he ever weighed in heavier than that. There might have been an exhibition bout that he fought with one of his sparring partners where he came in heavier than this. But in terms of his official professional fights, that was his career heaviest, 239 pounds. And, Mike Tyson, genetically, Mike Tyson's very interesting because he's this short, stubby kind of build. He's not a particularly wide guy. And I've seen Mike Tyson in person. When he came to the UK for one of his fights, I saw him in person outside it was on Park Lane. He was staying at, was it the Grosvenor? Grosvenor on Park Lane? I can't remember which hotel it was on Park Lane. Was it the Hilton or the Grosvenor? I can't remember now. But either way, he was at this hotel on Park Lane, and I went down there, saw Mike Tyson, and he was very small. That's the first thing that, struck me about the guy, is how small he was. Because TV really does add pounds on people. It really does make people look bigger than they really are. Because when I saw Tyson in real life, I was surprised how small the man was. And yes, he's a muscular guy with a very big neck, but his shoulders are not broad. Yeah, Tyson's got a very, very compact frame. Not broad shoulders, just very solid, compact. And he's kind of bigger. How can I describe it? He's not that wide in terms of his shoulders, but if you look at a profile of him, all right, his chest and his back, that part is wide. So he's very thick, in the chest and that, and the back. But in terms of his shoulders, he's not very wide. He's actually got quite, I don't want to say narrow shoulders, but he's not a broad-shouldered guy, Mike Tyson. And I was surprised by how small he was. But again, that makes it all the more remarkable, the fact that he was able to take on so much bigger guys, so much taller guys, and have so much success. Let's not get it twisted. Even though I'm doing a critique here of Mike Tyson's career because I'm trying to bring some balance to the equation, because there are so many Mike Tyson fanboys who won't hear one word of criticism about him. As far as they're concerned, he's the perfect fighter. And when he was in his prime, when he was with Rooney, when Customado was alive, he would have gone 100-0 and never lost. I mean, there are some Mike Tyson fanboys who, they're probably crazy enough to believe that if Mike Tyson had stayed with Kevin Rooney, he'd still be world champion now. A couple of years ago, I remember a Mike Tyson fanboy saying that Mike Tyson could beat Wilder right now. Can you imagine? This is when Wilder would, a newly crowned WBC heavyweight champion, and a Tyson fanboy saying that Mike Tyson could beat Wilder right now. Mike Tyson, right, in 2005, over 10 years ago, lost to Kevin McBride. And you're trying to tell me he can beat Wilder now? What are you talking about? But again, this is the insanity of most Mike Tyson fanboys. So I'm telling you, these people are not well in the head. Anyway, the Brian Nielsen fight, he managed to drop Nielsen. He beat the crap out of him, all kind of combinations. And interestingly enough, after the fight, Brian Nielsen said that Mike Tyson was not the hardest puncher he ever faced. And that's something that several Mike Tyson opponents said. Danny Williams said the same thing. Brian Nielsen said Mike Tyson was not the hardest puncher he ever faced. He said the thing that bothered him about Mike Tyson was the speed. It wasn't the punching power, it's the hand speed that bothered him. Yeah. And as I've said many, many times, Mike Tyson was a great puncher, but, Brian Nielsen took plenty of Mike Tyson punches before he went down. Yeah. Plenty of Mike Tyson punches. Tyson was a great puncher, but it was the speed, the combination punching ability, the timing. Mike Tyson had great timing, especially in his prime. He had very, very good timing. And that's one of the things that made him so dangerous. The punching power was very good, but it was the timing, the speed, the combination punching ability, the accuracy. Mike Tyson was a very clean puncher. This is one thing I have to say about Mike Tyson. He punched very cleanly. The punches connected with the knuckle part of the glove, as Mike Tyson would say, on the vital area. Yeah. Very, very clean puncher. That's why his punches sounded a lot of the time different from other heavyweights, because he was punching very cleanly. If you ever go into the gym and see somebody on a bag, they might not be the hardest puncher in the gym, but if they know how to punch the bag cleanly with the knuckle part, their punches will make a better sound than a lot of other people in the gym. And it might be a little guy, and he's hitting the bag, and it's like pop, 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 pop. It's like gunshots hitting the bag. And he's only a little guy, and there are big heavyweights who come in there, and their punches don't make that sound, because the little guy's punching more cleanly. And this is how Mike Tyson was. He used to punch very clean. And this is one of the reasons his punches had such, a different sound. Whereas a George Foreman, his punches, I'm sure, did not sound like a Mike Tyson punch, because a lot of Foreman's punches were clubbing and cuffing, and they weren't really delivered as cleanly as most of Mike Tyson's shots. All right. So that's one thing that does have to be said about Mike Tyson. Anyway, Brian Nielsen fight. He gets the job done, his career heaviest, and then he goes into the Lennox Lewis fight. Now, Lennox Lewis was coming off the Hasim Rahman fights. He'd redeemed himself against Hasim Rahman in the rematch, but there was still a lot. I remember at the time having conversations with people, and there were a lot of people who thought that Mike Tyson was going to knock Lennox Lewis out. Facts. Most of the Mike Tyson fanboys thought Tyson was going to knock Lennox Lewis out. And again, this shows you how detached the Mike Tyson fanboys are from reality, because at this stage, Mike Tyson was a washed up fighter. Yeah, he was washed up. So the fact that Lewis, beat him, yeah, you can't read too much into it. He beat up a washed up Mike Tyson. Although Lennox Lewis wasn't at his best himself. He wasn't at the pinnacle himself. Okay, not physically anyway. In terms of Lennox Lewis's mental confidence and his boxing brain, Lewis was probably at the pinnacle, by the time he fought Rahman in the rematch and Mike Tyson. That's when Lewis was at the pinnacle in terms of his boxing brain. But in terms of physically, Lewis was, way past his best, way past his prime physically as well. Not as past it as Tyson, because Tyson had abused his body with drink and drugs and all that kind of business, whereas Lennox Lewis was a relatively clean liver. But Lewis was not at his physical prime when he fought Mike Tyson. What age was Lennox Lewis? 35 or something like that, 36 when he fought Mike Tyson? He wasn't at his physical prime. Lewis's physical prime, if you go back and look at Lennox Lewis when he fought Razor Ruddock, that was really Lennox Lewis's physical prime when he was in his late 20s. I think Lewis was 27 or 28 when he fought Razor Ruddock. That was Lewis's physical prime. Yeah, that's when he was at his fastest. That's when he was at his sharpest. That's when he was at his most mobile. That's when he looked most coordinated. That was Lennox Lewis's physical prime. Yeah, around that kind of time. Later on, don't get it twisted. It's not like Lennox Lewis had deteriorated to the point where he was just garbage physically. No, he was still very good physically. But I'm just saying, he wasn't at his absolute physical peak when he fought Mike Tyson. He was an older man who was getting up there in age. All right. And all the training camps and all that kind of business does take its toll on you. But still, he was far closer to his peak than Mike Tyson was. No question about it. But anyway, the point I'm making here is the Tyson fanboys were acting like this washed up version of Tyson was going to knock Lennox Lewis out. This is what people were saying. Even people who weren't necessarily Tyson fanboys, people who were just fans of, casual fans of boxing, they were saying, Tyson's going to do that, Lewis. You see, their perception of Mike Tyson was so different than the reality. Even though we knew Tyson was washed up, we knew Tyson hadn't looked the same. We knew Tyson had been beaten by Holmes. We knew all these things that had happened to Mike Tyson, but yet still the vast majority of Tyson fanboys thought Tyson was going to win, and this exposes the lack of knowledge that Tyson fanboys have. The fact that they thought he was going to go in there and wipe Lennox Lewis out. This exposes their lack of knowledge. And by the way, people talk about today, the big fights not happening. People act like the big fights back in the day, back in the 90s, happened just like that. They didn't. They were years in the making. Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe never happened because Riddick Bowe ducked the fight. And then by the time Riddick Bowe was ready to fight Lennox Lewis ended up losing. Well, actually, no. Lewis was supposed to fight Morrison the first time around. But anyway, Riddick Bowe ended up losing because it would have been Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe if... no, Bowe didn't lose. He actually got disqualification wins against Andrew Golota, but he got beaten up in the Golota fights, all right? It should have been Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe instead of Lennox Lewis versus Andrew Golota. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Yeah, that's what it should have been. There were various points in their careers when they could have fought, but one of them took a loss or the other one took a loss. And, that's the reason Lennox Lewis versus Riddick Bowe never happened. But initially it didn't happen because Eddie Futch admitted, years after Riddick Bowe had retired, he admitted that he was the one who blocked the Riddick Bowe-Lennox Lewis fight when Riddick Bowe first became undisputed heavyweight champion when he beat Evander Holyfield. Eddie Futch, Riddick Bowe's trainer, admitted he was the one who blocked it because he felt like Riddick Bowe wasn't mentally mature enough to beat Lennox Lewis. He still felt like Riddick Bowe had demons in his brain from the loss that he suffered to Lewis in the Olympic final in Seoul, Korea in 1988. So, yeah, anyway, Lennox Lewis, Riddick Bowe didn't happen in the 90s. And Lennox Lewis versus Holyfield, that took years to make. That wasn't a fight that just happened overnight. That took years to make. Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson, that took years to make. So everyone today acting like, these heavyweights are all ducking and this, that, and the other. Listen, in the 90s, people were acting like heavyweights were ducking. In the 90s, people were lamenting, how terrible the division was and all this kind of business. Trust me, I remember the 90s, and a lot of the same stuff that's going on today with regards to the fans and their frustrations was going on in the 90s too. Believe you me, I was there. I remember it very well. Anyway, the Lennox Lewis fight, Mike Tyson goes in, his second career heaviest. I think he was here 2, 3, 4 after the Brian Nielsen fight. He wasn't in shape. He had about one good round in him. And after that, he was done, and there was a lot of anticipation into the fight, before the fight, but it turned out to actually be a real anticlimax because Tyson had about one good round in him. He said Lennox Lewis hurt him. Who was in his corner for that fight? It was, who's the guy that trains Lara? I'm forgetting all the trainers' names. I'm forgetting all these trainers' names. Who's the guy that trains Lara, that also trained the Charlos, that was in Mike Tyson's corner? Jesus, Lord, I can't remember the guy's name. Why am I forgetting his name? He's like a big, well-known trainer, man. My memory for Mike Tyson, obviously my retention for Mike Tyson information is great, but when it comes to who's training him, I'm struggling right now. What is the guy's name? God, it's in the tip of my tongue. What is his name? What is his flipping name? It's on the tip of my tongue. No, it's gone. One of you guys is gonna have to put it in there. He's a black guy, pretty light-skinned black guy with a beard. He's an older guy now. Used to train one of the Charlos, trains Eris Landy Lara. The guy I'm talking about. Ronnie Shields. Oh my God, I've just remembered it. See, I told you it was on the tip of my tongue. Ronnie Shields is the guy, okay? Ronnie Shields was on Mike Tyson's corner. I remember Ronnie Shields in a documentary about Tyson versus Lennox Lewis. Ronnie Shields was saying that Mike Tyson came back to the corner at the end of the first round and he said that Lennox Lewis hit him with a right hand and it really hurt him. Yeah, it hurt him. And he told Ronnie Shields, I'm hurt from this right hand that Lennox Lewis hit him with. And after that, Mike Tyson was in his shell. He didn't want to try and attack because he was worried about this, punching power that Lennox Lewis had with the uppercut. And after that, it was pretty much Lennox Lewis picking the wings off an insect. That's what it looked like. It didn't look like a competitive fight after that. He just beat the crap out of Mike Tyson, and then eventually he knocked Mike Tyson out in the 8th round. And I do say that, some people take issue with this, right? But I'm telling you, Mike Tyson had a tremendous chin, one of the best chins I've ever seen in heavyweight boxing. And the only time he was really, really properly knocked out, where he was out of it, was against Buster Douglas. Yeah. And he took a hell of a beating against Buster Douglas for, nearly 10 rounds before he eventually went down. So fatigue weakened his punch resistance, and then Buster Douglas's punches finished him off. But against Lennox Lewis, yes, he was also fatigued. But against Lewis, it was more fatigue than him being seriously hurt. When he went down against Lennox Lewis from that big right hand, he kind of just gave up. His body just slumped, and he kind of just slumped down to the canvas from that big right hand. But Tyson was still fully coherent. You know, he had cuts on his eyes, and he rubbed his glove on his eye, and he was like, oh man, you know? And he got up after that, and he was still with it. He wasn't out of it at all against Lennox Lewis. That's why I tell you that Mike Tyson had one of the most underrated chins in heavyweight boxing. But as I say, by the time he fought Lennox Lewis, he was finished. He was washed up. He was beaten psychologically and also very, very tired. And that's really what put him down as much as the punch. You know, he was tired. He was psychologically defeated. He just wasn't in a good place in his life at the time when he fought Lennox Lewis. But actually, his wife said that Mike Tyson changed dramatically after the Lennox Lewis loss. He said that really, really hurt him and it hit home, and his whole personality changed after that. And I think that was, let me not say that was a transition moment, because he was still a bit crazy against Etienne Williams and McBride, but his wife did say that was a big moment in Mike Tyson's life, that his personality changed after the Lennox Lewis fight, you know, because there was so much hype going into that fight. So many people wanted Tyson to win. The Tyson fanboy still believed in him, etc., etc. So for him to get beaten and humiliated in the way that he did, you know, it would have had a psychological effect on him. That pretty much signaled the end of Mike Tyson as a viable heavyweight contender, you know, and a viable title contender. So yeah, he loses to Lennox Lewis, takes on Clifford Etienne. Clifford Etienne, a very interesting character, because he was also from a similar background to Mike Tyson, you know, a jailbird. In fact, he was a more serious career criminal than Mike Tyson. Clifford Etienne, aka the Black Rhino, he was inspired by Mike Tyson. He's one of these guys. There were many fighters back in the days, by the way, who used to try and copy Mike Tyson, from Cliff Cowser to Clifford Etienne to Lionel Butler. At some stage in Lionel Butler's career, he was trying to be a fake Mike Tyson, wearing the black shorts and the little black boots, just like Tyson was wearing, you know, because Tyson tried to pattern his style on the old school fighters like Jack Dempsey and them kind of people, in terms of the boots and no robe and these black shorts and everything very plain. So anyway, Clifford Etienne was a guy who, you know, at one stage in his career tried to pattern himself on Mike Tyson. But Clifford Etienne, the best way I could describe him is kind of like a slightly more in shape Chisora. Yeah, that's his style. But Clifford Etienne didn't have Chisora's chin. Not at all. He had, you know, quite a few chin issues. But he really rose to prominence as a contender, Clifford Etienne, when he fought Layman Brewster. Yeah, and he managed to beat Layman Brewster in that fight. So, yeah, anyway, Etienne fought Mike Tyson. Tyson knocked him out with a right hand in the first round. Clifford Etienne nearly broke his leg on the way down. And I don't think it was too long after the Tyson fight that Clifford Etienne actually went back to prison for armed robbery again. You know, he came out of prison having done a long stint for armed robbery, and then he made himself into a boxer and made himself some money. And then after losing to Tyson, he was like, you know what, let me go to this armed robbery stuff. Let me go back to this armed robbery stuff again. And he went straight back into prison. And I think he got sentenced for a long time when he went back into prison again. So yeah, sad story. But Tyson dispatched of him, and the referee, I can't remember who the referee was. Let me check out who the referee was. Who was the referee? Bill Clancy, okay? Referee Bill Clancy said it was the hardest punch he's ever seen in a boxing ring. Bill Clancy been around for a long time as a referee. And he said the Mike Tyson, Clifford Etienne punch was the hardest punch he's ever seen, you know, up close in the ring as a referee. He said it was a tremendous shot. And it was a very, very well delivered punch, a very short punch. And yeah, Clifford Etienne went down in spectacular fashion and, you know, nearly bust his knee on the way down. So yeah, that was a nice little win there for Tyson. Then he fought Danny Williams. And this was a big deal at the time, you know, for South London. Danny Williams fighting Mike Tyson. Very few people thought Danny Williams had much of a chance. But Danny Williams went in there 265 pounds and he fought the best fight he ever fought in his career. He was letting combinations go. He had self-belief. He wasn't intimidated. And he nearly got taken out in the first round against Mike Tyson. You know, Tyson was putting all kind of combinations on him, and Tyson actually looked quite good in the Danny Williams fight. And I think Tyson was actually training with Freddie Roach for this fight. Yeah, because previously he'd been with Ronnie Shields. He'd been with Stacey McKinley. I think Tyson had worked with Stacey McKinley for a while. He worked with Ronnie Shields. But in the Danny Williams fight, I believe he was working with Freddie Roach. And Freddie Roach said that, you know, Tyson was a good puncher. I remember Freddie Roach talking about punching power. He said Tyson was a good puncher on the pads, but he said the hardest puncher he's ever taken on the pads was Vladimir Klitschko. And I can well believe it. You see, I'm telling you now that Vladimir Klitschko hit harder than Mike Tyson. I know people don't want to believe that. Oh, no, it's nonsense. I'm telling you, Vladimir Klitschko, a 250-pound man, very powerful, very athletic, good technique, knows how to get power in his straight right hand. He hit harder than Mike Tyson. Was he as fast as Tyson? No. Was he as dynamic as Tyson? No. Was his chin as good as Tyson? No. Was he as good a combination puncher as Tyson? No. Was his timing as good as Tyson? No. All right? He wasn't as elusive as Tyson. Many, many things Tyson had over Vladimir Klitschko. All right? But one thing I can tell you Vladimir Klitschko had over Mike Tyson, he was a bigger puncher. He had a better jab and he was a bigger puncher, I'm telling you now. And this is also backed up by Freddie Roach. And people say, oh, it was the end of Mike Tyson's career. Yeah, but Mike Tyson still had power at this stage of his career. He said so himself. Power is the last thing to go with boxers. Mike Tyson still had his punching power at this stage. And yeah, he lit Danny Williams up like a Christmas tree in the first round. Williams was in all types of trouble. But then Mike Tyson twisted his knee against Danny Williams. When he was trying to finish Danny Williams off, he twisted his knee. He's an old guy. He's an old guy who was weighing 233 pounds when he should have been at least 10 pounds lighter. You know, twisted his knee against Danny Williams, and then it was downhill from there. Because once Danny Williams realized that Mike Tyson couldn't get the same kind of power into his punches because of the fact that he had a compromised knee, Danny Williams started going at him. And there's no disrespect to Danny Williams. I don't want to take nothing away from him. You know, he's a Brixton boy too. But I'm just being real. Yeah. Mike Tyson twisted his knee, and that's the reason that he couldn't finish off Danny Williams. That is something that's true. That is something that the Tyson fanboys talk about. That's actually true. He did twist his knee against Danny Williams, and that compromised him. And, you know, the rest is history. I mean, maybe Danny Williams could have got through the fight somehow, some way, until Tyson got tired later on in the fight and maybe won the fight. Who knows? But, you know, we'll never know. But the way it played out, it was the knee that was significant because Mike Tyson was well on top and he was all over Danny Williams like a cheap suit. Facts. So, yeah, Danny Williams fight. Mike Tyson ended up getting beaten up by Danny Williams. And he didn't, from what I remember, he didn't try any illegal tactics against Danny Williams. Yeah? He didn't try any illegal tactics. It was a relatively clean fight for Mike Tyson. But he had a compromised knee and Danny Williams just overwhelmed him in the end. Punched him, continued to punch him in the fourth round, wouldn't stop. Mike Tyson went down and he sagged down against the ropes. And at that point, you knew Mike Tyson was just done. You know, it was only a matter of time before this guy retires because he was done. Tyson was just looking around thinking, man, how the hell did I fall this far in my career? You know, he was sat down literally thinking about his career, bleeding from his eye, just thinking, oh my God, how am I losing to guys like this? No disrespect to Danny Williams, but I'm sure that's what Mike Tyson must have been thinking at the time. How am I losing to guys like this? I would have taken this guy out, you know, a couple of rounds if I was in any kind of serious shape. So anyway, lost the Danny Williams fight. Then for his final fight with Kevin McBride, he was trained by his longtime friend and former world champion, Jeff Fennick, who was an Australian, one of Australia's most famous fighters. Jeff Fennick trained him for this. You know, Mike Tyson said he was in better shape under Jeff Fennick and all this kind of business. I remember seeing some footage actually of Mike Tyson training with Jeff Fennick for the McBride fight. And Tyson was actually throwing up in a bucket because he was being trained so, you know, so hard by Jeff Fennick. Like they were going in with the training and Mike Tyson was actually throwing up. But anyway, yeah, he trained with Jeff Fennick for this final fight against Kevin McBride. It was a sad fight. He tried to once again foul his way out of the fight. And by the way, the fouling, this is something that Teddy Atlas said, because Teddy Atlas knows Mike Tyson. I know a lot of the Mike Tyson fanboys say Teddy Atlas is this, that, and the other. And look, I've got my reservations about Teddy Atlas. I think Teddy Atlas's character is a bit off. This is what I tell you. Watching Teddy Atlas over the years, following his career over the years, analyzing his character over the years, Teddy Atlas's character is a bit off. He says a lot of good things, but in terms of the way Teddy Atlas deals with fighters, Teddy Atlas is very overbearing. Yeah, this is the reputation Teddy Atlas has had for many, many years when it comes to fighters. He almost has like a bully mentality with his own fighters. He's very overbearing, breathing down their necks, and, you know, a lot of fighters just don't like it. And this is why Teddy Atlas fell out with a lot of fighters. He fell out with Shannon Briggs because of the attitude that he had. He fell out with Michael Moorer because of the attitude that he had. He was with Alexander Povetkin. I mean, Povetkin don't speak English, so I guess it's more difficult for Teddy Atlas to be overbearing with an Alexander Povetkin. But Teddy Atlas was a very overbearing character, you know, and he tried and subjugate the fighter. This is how it was. So I understand Teddy Atlas has got certain ways about him that are a little off, all right? But Teddy Atlas does know Mike Tyson. You're not going to try to tell me Teddy Atlas don't know him and don't know him psychologically. He knows Mike Tyson. And Teddy Atlas said, going into the Holyfield rematch, this is facts now. Teddy Atlas said, Mike Tyson may do something illegal to get himself disqualified in the rematch. Teddy Atlas said that before the fight, before Tyson bit Holyfield. And in retrospect, everybody's going to say, oh, well, blah, 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 you know, Tyson's dirty and this, that, and the other. Trust me, nobody thought Mike Tyson was going to bite a chunk out of Holyfield's ear going into the Holyfield rematch. Nobody thought that. But Teddy Atlas said, you know what, Tyson may do something to get out of the fight. Because Teddy Atlas had taken him from the amateurs. He knew Tyson better than Tyson knew himself psychologically. He knew his personality and his traits inside out. You see, so he knew that Tyson had this in him to be fouling and all that kind of stuff. He must have seen it in the gym. He must have seen it in some of Tyson's amateur fights to be able to say this. Yeah. And, you know, they say in life that we are, God, how does the saying go? I think it's something like once an adult, twice a child. And that to me is accurate in terms of the way human beings mature. You know, you're born a certain way, you grow up as a child, your mentality is a certain way, then you're an adult, your mentality changes. Then as you get older, you become more childlike again. Yeah, once an adult, twice a child. And Mike Tyson's the traits that he had as a young teenager when he was learning how to box, those same traits, those same mental weaknesses started manifesting themselves again in the latter stages of his career. Yeah, they started manifesting themselves. So anyway, fought Kevin McBride, a sad fight. Kevin McBride, you know, I mean, calling Kevin McBride a fringe contender is being generous. That's being generous to Kevin McBride. No disrespect to the guy, but calling him a fringe contender is being generous. And, you know, back in the days, Tyson would have taken out Kevin McBride with relative ease. But as it was, he was way, way over the hill. He tried to foul. He tried to break Kevin McBride's arm. And yeah, he eventually retired after 6 rounds. And that was that. So that was Mike Tyson's career. Yes, it's been a long video. It's been a long one, definitely. And I'll definitely do some similar videos on other fighters. But I just had to give you guys a breakdown on Mike Tyson's career, give you some anecdotes and, you know, let you know I know about Mike Tyson. Ain't nobody going to sit there and tell me that I don't know about Mike Tyson. I know all about Mike Tyson, and I know more about Mike Tyson than any of these Tyson fanboys do. Yeah. And I can look at Mike Tyson's career objectively. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Mike Tyson wouldn't be one of the top heavyweights in the world today if he was in his prime today. He would be. Mike Tyson would be a tremendous addition to the heavyweight division if he was in his prime today. Yeah, and Mike Tyson would beat a lot of the heavyweights around today. But am I going to say he's going to walk through the division? No. Tyson was a very small guy, right? And the heavyweights today are enormous. And I know size is not everything, but size is a lot. Okay, when you got size on Mike Tyson, you look at some of the guys who had size on him and knew how to use the size. James Smith, okay, he used the size holding a lot, but he never got hit with any clean punches in the whole fight. There were plenty of opportunities for Mike Tyson to set up punches and throw shots. He couldn't get them off. The sheer size of Bone Crusher Smith, right? The sheer size of Bone Crusher Smith prevented him from doing a lot of things he wanted to do. And the clinching that somebody like a Klitschko or a Joshua or any of these big guys could do against Tyson, they wouldn't have to do it as excessively as Smith. They'd have to just do it strategically to shut Tyson down at certain points. Tyson was very dangerous in the early rounds. In fact, Tyson would be dangerous for any fighter in history in the first 2-3 rounds. He'd be deadly against any fighter in history in the early rounds. But if you're a big guy and you've got heart and you've got ability and you've got power and you've got skills and you can get out of the first 3 rounds against Tyson, you got a great chance of beating him. And I'm talking about, you know, the top level guys, the world champion level guys. You're a big guy with heart, ability, you know, you can get out the first couple rounds against Tyson, you got a chance, a serious chance against a prime Tyson, if you know how to take advantage of his weaknesses, which he did have. Particularly the fact that he was so intermittent in terms of his work. You know, when Tyson wants to rest, that's when you got to pressure him. That's when you got to throw shots at him. That's when you got to break him down psychologically. You know, and Tyson showed a lot of heart in the Buster Douglas fight when he was way behind and he was taking a beating. But other than that, in all the losing fights that Mike Tyson had, other than the Buster Douglas fight, he was looking for a way out. He was fouling and he was doing all kinds of things, like in the Holyfield fight. He was looking for a way out. You know, Holyfield rematch, looking for a way out. Francois Botha, you know, he was fouling and doing all kind of things because he was losing in the fight. Actually, tell a lie. The Lennox-Lewis fight, he also showed heart. The Lewis and the Douglas fight, those losses, he showed heart. But the other fights where he was either losing or he lost, you know, all these fouling tactics and all this kind of business came out. And so that was a weakness of Mike Tyson. He had a psychological weakness. It didn't manifest in every fight in his career, but it manifested in a lot of his fights where, somebody was getting the better of him and he starts resorting to illegal tactics. And that shows you that he's breaking down psychologically. Yeah. And to be fair, that trait manifested after prison. So, maybe prison did mess him up a bit psychologically. Or maybe there were other factors around the time that he went to prison and came out of prison that messed him up psychologically. Maybe it wasn't just prison. Maybe it was just a particular moment in his life, a time in his life where he was just thinking differently. But either way, it was in him. If it wasn't in him, it would have never been able to come out of him. And this is something that Teddy Atlas knew years and years ago, that this kind of characteristic was in Mike Tyson, buried somewhere deep inside. I guess during his prime years, when he fought Douglas, he had the discipline not to allow that to manifest. Maybe he thought that would be dishonor at the time. He was still living by, trying to live by the D'Amato code. But after that, after he came out of prison, he had the jail mentality, and it's like, anything goes. Certainly he was thinking that when he fought Holyfield and he bit a chunk out of his ear. He was thinking anything goes. And I remember, one of the best rappers of all time is a guy called Rakim. And I remember Rakim was a friend of Mike Tyson and he was a big Tyson fan. And he said after the Holyfield-Tyson fight that he lost respect for Evander Holyfield. Can you imagine? These Tyson fanboys. He said he lost respect for Evander Holyfield after that fight because he said Holyfield acted like a bitch when he got bitten. What? I mean, this is the mentality of Tyson fanboys. The guy who gets a chunk bitten out of his ear, he said he acted like a bitch. Unbelievable. When it comes to Tyson fight. Isn't it incredible? This is why I tell you there's nothing like Tyson fanboys. There is nothing like the delusion and the insanity of Tyson fanboys. But anyway, getting back to these big heavyweights, James Smith, look how he did against Tyson. Tony Tucker wasn't a big guy in terms of weight, but he was 6'5". He had a good reach on him. Look what he did against Mike Tyson. Biggs, yeah, but Biggs was a crackhead. Carl Williams is a tall guy, but he was always, a chinny tall guy, and he was a tall guy who, skinny, chinny, easy to get to, and his best years were behind him anyway. Buster Douglas, a big guy again. So the point is, a lot of the big guys were the more durable guys against Mike Tyson. Your Buster Douglases, even the Frank Bruno did, 5 rounds, even though he's stiff as a board and very slow and only 6'3". Not like a lot of the heavyweights today who are 6'6" and 6'9" and all this kind of business. James Buster Douglas, 6'4", 6'3.5", 6'4". I mean, imagine Tyson Fury against Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson never fought anybody as big as Tyson Fury. Not just as tall as Tyson Fury, but not even as, heavy as Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury was an enormous man. I mean, actually, let me not say as heavy. Maybe Kevin McBride was as heavy, but that was, Tyson way, way past his best. Kevin McBride and Danny Williams. But I'm talking about a prime Mike Tyson. He never fought anybody anywhere near that size. So just imagine. I'm not saying these guys are going to beat Mike Tyson. I'm just saying imagine the fact that Buster Douglas and all these other guys, Razor Ruddock, he was 6'3", 238, 228, and he's going 12 rounds with Tyson, 7 rounds in the first fight. Is Tyson just going to walk through everybody today? Are you sure? These guys are a lot bigger than Razor Ruddock today. A lot bigger than Razor Ruddock. A lot bigger than Buster Douglas. A lot bigger than Tony Tucker. A lot bigger than James Bone Crusher Smith. Guys today are a lot bigger than this, a lot more powerful than this, and they're skillful. Yeah, it's not like the guys today are just all terribly skilled, and I did talk earlier in the video about how Tony Tucker was a skilled fighter. He was skilled, yeah, but there were a lot of things that Tony Tucker wasn't particularly gifted at. He wasn't a particularly gifted puncher, he wasn't particularly physically strong, etc., etc. There were many things, but anyway, the point I'm making is Mike Tyson would do very well in the heavyweight division today, but to just say that he's going to wipe everybody out in 1 or 2 rounds is silly. It's silly talk. He didn't wipe everybody out in 1 or 2 rounds, even when he was fighting in his prime. Yeah, guys who would not be world champions today, Tyson wasn't able to wipe them out in 1 or 2 rounds in his prime. Many guys. So the idea that Tyson's just going to walk through the whole heavyweight division today is ridiculous. It is ridiculous. But would he be a great addition? Of course he would. And I would love to see a new Mike Tyson. I've been waiting for a new Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, to me, is the most exciting heavyweight there's ever been. The most explosive heavyweight there's ever been. So I'm waiting for a new Mike Tyson. I want to see a short heavyweight who comes in there dynamic, a new Tyson or a new Frazier, etc. Even a new Tua. I mean, give us a new Tua. People are talking about Alexander Povetkin being the closest thing we have to Mike Tyson at the moment. And he is actually the closest thing we have to Mike Tyson at the moment. And that just shows you how far away we are from having a new Mike Tyson. Because Povetkin is slightly like Tyson because of what he learned from Teddy Atlas. And because of the fact that he's shorter than most of the other heavyweights today. But he's, it's chalk and cheese, really. Mike Tyson and Alexander Povetkin. Tyson was just way more dynamic than Povetkin, way faster, way more explosive, way more exciting than a Povetkin, you know. And I rate Povetkin. Povetkin's a good fighter. But anyway, that is my breakdown of Mike Tyson's career. Yes, I've been trying to talk at 100 miles an hour because if I wasn't talking at 100 miles an hour, this video would be about 4 hours long, and it's already over 2 hours long. So yeah, hold tight to everybody who sat with me through this trip through Mike Tyson's career. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Shout out to the Mike Tyson fanboys. But again, this is not... Yes, I do sound like I'm being a bit harsh on Mike Tyson, and I'm more talking about the things that were wrong with him rather than the things that were right with him. But because I want to be objective, I want to bring balance to the situation, because the Mike Tyson fanboys give you such a skewed view, a biased view in favor of Mike Tyson. And they never want to talk about his flaws in terms of his character, you know, holes in his resume, and also holes in his fighting style. They never want to talk about any of that. And every fighter has flaws. There's no such thing as a perfect fighter. There's no such thing as a perfect heavyweight. All fighters have got flaws. And that's what I want to highlight about Mike Tyson. And when you talk about Mike Tyson being small, all right, you talk about Mike Tyson being small. Here's Mike Tyson next to Izu Ogono, right? Look how small he is next to Izu Ogono. And Izu Ogono is not even one of the biggest heavyweights around today. Yeah? Look at Mike Tyson next to Vitaly. Where's Vitaly Klitschko and Tyson? All right. Yeah, there. Vitaly Klitschko and Tyson. All right? Look how small he is. Look how tiny he is next to Vitaly Klitschko. Is this one? Yeah. Tyson next to Klitschko. You know, Tyson was a midget next to these modern day heavyweights. He's tiny. He's a short little fat Tyson when he was really overweight next to Vitaly Klitschko. You know, and there are many, I mean, how about this one, right? Just to emphasize how small Mike Tyson is. And I was shocked by how small he was when I saw him in person, right? Look how small Mike Tyson is. That's Mike Tyson with Golovkin. Look at Tyson next to Golovkin. You know how small this man is? Golovkin's looking taller than Mike Tyson. Right? Mike Tyson is a small guy. The heavyweights today are enormous. This is Tyson next to Golovkin. I remember Larry Merchant once saying that he thought Mike Tyson in his prime kind of looked like a big middleweight. And that's how small Tyson is. When you see him in person, he's a small guy. You know, unless you're a very small person yourself, you won't think he's small. But, you know, if you're a person who's of any size, you meet Tyson and you think, wow, this guy's small. He looks a lot bigger on TV. And not just his height, because you know that he's a short heavyweight, but the size of his body. You expect him to be like a big, you know, not like a big rugby player or some kind of big power lifter, but he don't. He's really compact and small when you see him in real life. And so a guy this size going up against the modern heavyweights, you know, even look at Mike Tyson with I'm not looking at what I'm typing here, people. Mike Tyson, Badou Jack. There is a picture of Mike Tyson with Badou Jack, but I guess we can't find it here. I guess it's on Badou Jack's Instagram. But I've seen a picture of Mike Tyson with Badou Jack, and Badou Jack is towering over Mike Tyson. like Badou Jack looks huge next to Mike Tyson. All right. This is Mike Tyson with Spike Lee, Kanye West, and 50 Cent. All right. Look how small Tyson looks next to these guys. He's a small guy. And the heavyweights today are absolutely enormous. All right. So anyway, that was Mike Tyson's career. Summed it up as best I could. Gave you as many anecdotes as I could. And there's even more. I've got loads of Mike Tyson anecdotes and knowledge and all that kind of stuff in my brain, which you would have had to have been around during the Tyson era to know. You would have had to have read the publications that were around at the time to know the information. You know, this is not stuff. A lot of stuff I'm talking about is not stuff you can even find on the internet. Yeah, some of the stuff you had to read certain publications. You had to see certain news pieces on the news at the time, or television programs at the time during the 80s and 90s when Mike Tyson was fighting. You had to be around during the time to know a lot of the knowledge about Mike Tyson that I know. Yeah. But some of it, I guess you can look up on the internet and find out. But a lot of it you had to be around at the time. So, yeah, I could talk about Mike Tyson for days. This is the thing. This is why this is one of the longest videos I've ever done, because I know about Mike Tyson. You know, I don't know about everything in the world. There are plenty of things I could not lecture people on. There are plenty of things I could not wax lyrical about for 2 hours plus. But one of the things I do know a hell of a lot about is Mike Tyson. All right, so I ain't going to have none of these Tyson fanboys coming at me telling me I don't know about the man. I know more about Mike Tyson than any of these fanboys do. Yeah? Any of these fanboys do. And you look at Steve Lott, right? You know, no disrespect to Steve Lott. Shout out to Steve Lott. Steve Lott was with Tyson. He knows Tyson as a person. But Steve Lott, he does have kind of a biased view. Yeah? That's one thing I will say about Steve Lott. Steve Lott doesn't have a lot of good things to say about Don King, understandably. He doesn't have a lot of good things to say about Shelley Finkel. He doesn't have a lot of good things to say about a lot of people who were involved in Mike Tyson's life. But Steve Lott is biased in the sense that he sees Kevin Rooney, Jimmy Jacobs, Costamado. He says this circle surrounding Tyson is perfect. And he says that Tyson was basically the perfect student when he was in that circle. But he doesn't ever try and critique what went on in that circle. He doesn't ever try and look at what went on in that circle and think, you know what? Maybe it wasn't as perfect as we thought it was. You know, because Teddy Atlas has talked about the fact that there was tension between Mike Tyson and Costamado. You know, it's something that I've never heard Steve Lott talk about. But Teddy Atlas said there was tension between Mike Tyson and Costamado. You know, and even Jose Torres said there was tension between Mike Tyson and Costamado. And that Costamado was coming to the end of his tether with Mike Tyson at one point. Because Tyson was such a wayward, you know, delinquent teenager that Costamado was, you know, on the brink of thinking about throwing him out. Yeah, this is what Teddy Atlas and Jose Torres talked about in the past. But you'd never hear none of this from Steve Lott. You know, with all due respect to the man, you don't hear him talking about that, or I haven't. You know, and this idea that Mike Tyson, if he'd stayed with Kevin Rooney, could have gone 100-0. Well, I don't buy that neither. Because when Mike Tyson was with Kevin Rooney, Larry Holmes predicted Mike Tyson's downfall. Yeah, going into the Larry Holmes fight, Larry Holmes said, down the line, Mike Tyson's going to destroy himself. He's going to destroy himself. This is when he was with Rooney. This is when he was training like a demon. This is when he still had, you know, these guys around him. All right. So Larry Holmes predicted it. Larry Holmes knew. He understood Mike Tyson's character. He understood what kind of person he was. And he knew down the line, this guy's going to destroy himself. So whether he was with Rooney or without Rooney, it was always going to happen. Because it was in Mike Tyson's character for him to go off the rails. It was in Mike Tyson's character for his career to fall apart. Or else, how did Larry Holmes know? Well, just a guess? No, he came out with something very specific. He said, if Tyson does happen to win the fight between me and him, down the line, he's going to destroy himself. He's going to go down in history as an SOB. This is what Larry Holmes said. And again, Larry Holmes is a very sharp-tongued individual, right? He don't hold his tongue. He has no filter, and he just comes out with, you know, whatever he comes out with. And that did rub a lot of people up the wrong way when it comes to Larry Holmes. You know, he was a very harsh kind of man with his words. Very harsh man. And if Larry Holmes ever had a good word to say about another heavyweight, it was rare. It was very rare. Very rare. And understandably, because he was like that, not a lot of people talked to him. You know, but one thing he did say about Mike Tyson, which turned out to be true, down the line he's going to destroy himself. And that's when he was with Rooney. That's when he was in his prime. Yeah? So you got to take that on board, man. You know, I think Tyson, great fighter, but another thing as well is Mike Tyson's style had an expiration date on it. Because once you figure out Mike Tyson's style, what he was doing, the blueprint was there and Mike Tyson couldn't adapt. You look at the greatest fighters of all time, from Muhammad Ali to, you know, even some of the modern greats like Floyd Mayweather. These are people who over time could adapt their style. Bernard Hopkins. When Hopkins first turned professional, he was kind of a brawler and a pressure fighter. He adapted his style over time to become more of a boxer and then a flat out counterpuncher, you know, very late on in his career. So he adapted his style. The greatest fighters can adapt. Muhammad Ali was up on his toes during his prime years, throwing combinations, moving here and there, the dancing master. But as he got older and his feet slowed down and he became heavier and he lost his athleticism, he had to adapt his style. I hope I ain't been saying adopt, right? He had to adapt his style over time. Mike Tyson couldn't adapt. He only could fight one way because of his size, because he was limited by his size. So he only could fight one way, and that was going forward. There was nothing else he could do. So once people figured out his pattern, once people figured out his weaknesses, it was a wrap for Mike Tyson. It was a wrap. Because Tyson's not a guy who can throw a million punches in a fight. He's a guy who fights in spurts. And once you figure out he fights in spurts and you start attacking him in between those spurts, you've got him sussed. You got to wait for a couple. You got to get through the early rounds, because in the early rounds, his attacks are quite frequent, or very frequent. But if you get past the early rounds to the point where Tyson is only fighting in spurts, attack him then. Tyson can't adapt. He can't do anything else. He can't stop throwing more punches. He doesn't have the stamina to do it. Mike Tyson actually said that during his career and for most of his life, he's had some kind of lung problem. And this is what he puts down to, the fact that he didn't have the highest work rate in the world. And after a couple of rounds early in a fight, he would slow right down. He said he had a lung problem in his career. He actually said that in the Trevor Berbick fight, he had gonorrhea in the Berbick fight. And he was actually worried about that fight going any rounds because he felt weak, in the Berbick fight. And yeah, he talked about some of his other fights in his prime where he said that he had this lung problem, So when you knew these weaknesses, once these weaknesses were figured out with Tyson, he could not adapt. He couldn't switch up his style for a rematch with anybody. He couldn't do it. There was nothing there to switch up to. He could only fight one way going forward. That was it. Fighting in spurts. That was it. That's the only way Tyson could fight. Yeah, he could do a bit more head movement here and there, but that's only going to last for a few rounds. Show me the Mike Tyson fight where all the way through the fight, he's constantly moving his head. His head movement slows down and he starts getting caught more the longer a fight goes, if a fighter is actually active and throwing punches at him. So yeah, that's one of the things about Tyson, is that he could only fight one way. I mean, even somebody like Gennady Golovkin, who is a pressure fighter, Golovkin has got more wrinkles to his game than Mike Tyson. Golovkin don't have the, the speed and the explosiveness and the head movement of Mike Tyson, but Golovkin can actually get up on his toes and pop a jab. Golovkin can actually move around and do other things when he needs to. Mike Tyson couldn't do that. Yeah. And there are very short fighters who are able to switch up their style. You look at Montel Griffith. What was it? Was it Griffin or Griffith? I'm thinking of Emil Griffith. Montel Griffin. Right? You look at Montel Griffin, the light heavyweight, the guy who fought James Toney, the guy who fought Roy Jones Jr. twice. Okay, famously knocked out he actually brought Roy Jones Jr.'s unbeaten run to an end in the first fight because he won by disqualification. In the second fight, Roy Jones Jr. came out with a vengeance and knocked Montel Griffin out with a tremendous left hook in the first round. But anyway, Montel Griffin was 5'7". 5'7" as a light heavyweight. All right, Tyson is 5'10" as a heavyweight. Montel Griffin was not a pressure fighter. Montel Griffin used to box guys at long range, and he's 5'7". Can you imagine? He's in there fighting guys who are 6'3", 6'2", 6'1", and he's 5'7", and he's boxing people at long range and winning. Yeah, very strange thing about Montel Griffin. You go up to, look, I'm not gonna get caught up in all that, but anyway. Manny Pacquiao was a shorter guy. He fought many taller guys, and he was in and out. He wasn't always just out and out pressure. So there are shorter guys who have different wrinkles to their game. But Mike Tyson wasn't one of the shorter guys who had different wrinkles to his game. He could only fight one way going forward. And once people figured that out, there was an expiration date on his style. And that's why I don't buy this idea that Mike Tyson could have gone 100-0. Nonsense. Who's saying that he could have gone 100-0? People like Kevin Rooney and Steve Lott. I'm not sure if Steve Lott has said that, but Steve Lott has said that Mike Tyson, probably wouldn't have lost if D'Amato didn't die and Jacobs didn't die and he was still with Rooney. I don't buy it, because Steve Lott saying that and Kevin Rooney saying that, they're basically bigging themselves up, right? Because they're basically saying, when he was with us, when he was with our team, he was invincible. But because he left us, that's when his whole career fell apart. So they're bigging themselves up, right? That's what they're doing. They're massaging their own egos and they're acting like, okay, well, you have to be with us, and leaving us was the biggest mistake you ever made. Respectfully, we all have egos as men and whatnot, but that's what I see Rooney and Steve Lott doing when they talk about stuff like that. You understand what I'm saying? And again, these are our guys who are on the inside. These are guys who knew Mike Tyson way better than I do, who know more about Tyson way better than I do, but there's a bias involved with those guys. Yeah? In favor of our team did so much for Tyson and we had the greatest team, and sharing in Mike Tyson's glory, basically, sharing in his success, acting like they are part of his success. And to a certain extent, they are part of his success. But acting like because he left them, or left Rooney and all that kind of business, that, he would have gone 100-0 if he hadn't. I just don't buy it. I just do not buy it at all, Anyway, you just go back to the amateurs when Holyfield was 25 pounds lighter than Mike Tyson and he held his own. It might have only been one round, but he still held his own and he was 25 pounds lighter. You understand what I'm saying? Anyway, let me stop jabbering on here about Mike Tyson. I can go on forever. There are so many ins and outs about Mike Tyson's career, Mike Tyson's life. I could literally talk about Mike Tyson for 8 hours straight, no script, just off the top of my head. So anyway, I'm going to end it here. And yeah, I'll do more videos that won't be this long about different fighters. So yeah, let me know how you feel in the comment section below, people. It's happening. I'm out.